I opened my eyes to the sound of my wife, Liu Cece, weeping in humiliation. Looking at her bruised body and the rustic room around us, a wave of shock washed over me. In my past life, I was a scoundrel whose gambling, drunkenness, and abuse destroyed my family. I had driven Cece and her younger sister, Liu Yanyan, to tragic ends, eventually jumping off a building in sheer remorse. Yet, here I was, reborn into 1979, 30 years in the past. Seeing Cece beg me to give her starving sister some food in exchange for abusing her made my heart ache with unbearable guilt. Half a year ago, my failed business left me in massive debt, driving me to drink, beat Cece, and plot to sell Yanyan to pay off gambling debts. Looking at Cece's cold, distrustful eyes, I realized my words meant nothing to her anymore. I embraced her and swore to make her happy for the rest of her life, but she only looked at me with numbness and disdain. She immediately rushed to the kitchen to cook, afraid of what wicked scheme I might unleash next. While Cece was in the kitchen, a sharp knock hit the front door. It was Song Erhei, the local thug who had cheated me in a rigged gambling game. He arrived, demanding the 20 yuan I supposedly owed him. When I confronted him for cheating me, he threatened to bring his gang to beat me up. Then, he looked toward the kitchen and suggested that I let Cece sleep with him for one night to erase the debt. Enraged by his disrespect toward my wife, I slapped him across the face, knocking him to the ground and sending 2 of his teeth flying. I kicked him hard and warned him that I would kill him if he ever targeted my wife again. Terrified, Song Er scrambled out of the yard, screaming threats that he would return with his brothers tonight to finish me off. Inside the kitchen, Cece watched the confrontation with surprise, but her eyes remained numb as she quietly went back to cooking. I knew earning back her trust would be a long road, but this time, I was ready to protect my family at all costs. After watching Song Erhei leave, I looked back at the kitchen and thought of Cece and my sick sister-in-law. My heart filled with deep regret for how much I had made them suffer. Determined to change our lives and put food on the table, I grabbed an old ox-horn bow, arrows, and a hunting knife, then headed straight into the freezing winter woods. At the edge of the forest, I ran into the local brothers, Song Dahu and Song Erhu. Their family had a long-standing grudge against mine, and they mocked me relentlessly. They scoffed at my old bow, claiming I wouldn't even catch a pheasant in the heavy snow. They even mocked my debts and joked that I would soon sell my wife. I ignored their cruel taunts and pressed onward into the deep forest. As I trekked through knee-deep snow, I noticed something strange. I was not tired or out of breath at all, and I felt boundless energy surging through my body. Testing my newfound strength, I easily drew the heavy 10-stone bow to its maximum limit. I shot an arrow into a thick tree 50 meters away, embedding it deep into the trunk. Rebirth had clearly gifted me with immense physical strength, hyper-sharp eyesight, and incredible precision. Suddenly, I heard sparrows chirping in the branches above. To my astonishment, I could actually understand their chatter. The birds mentioned seeing 3 sika deer foraging by a nearby mountain stream. Realizing I had gained the magical ability to comprehend animal language, I quietly followed the sparrows to the stream. At the mountain stream, I spotted 3 adult sika deer. I carefully army crawled through the snow to close the distance without alerting them. When I reached about 110 meters away, the largest deer sensed danger and gave an alarm call, causing the herd to scatter. Reacting instantly, I stood up, drew my bow, and fired an arrow. The arrow hit one of the deer straight in the flank. The wounded deer ran a short distance before collapsing onto the snow, staining it red. Standing over my kill, I estimated the deer weighed around 170 pounds, which would yield over 100 pounds of fresh venison. My new powers had paid off, and I finally had enough meat to feed my family. Carrying the massive sika deer effortlessly on my shoulder, I rushed down the mountain, eager to get back to my wife and sister-in-law before dark. At the base of the trail, I ran right into the Song Dahu brothers again. They were carrying only 2 wild chickens and a few rabbits, and their jaws dropped in absolute shock when they saw my giant haul. Unable to accept that I had brought down a deer with a simple ox-horn bow, they grew envious and hostile. Song Dahu tried to claim that the deer had been caught in their trap. He and his brother blocked my path, demanding I hand it over. When I refused, They tried to rob me by force. Little did they know, my rebirth had granted me immense strength and speed. I quickly threw my deer down and punched Song Dahu square in the face, knocking him out cold in one blow. When Song Erhu tried to strike me from behind with his rifle butt, I barely felt it. I effortlessly snatched his gun, kicked him to the snow, and stomped both of their shotguns into pieces. Terrified by my overwhelming power, the bruised brothers begged for mercy and promised to stay away from me. I retrieved my deer and walked back into the village as the sun set. Passing by the home of Old Man Song, a respected veteran hunter who had been like a mentor to my father, he rubbed his eyes in utter disbelief. He couldn't believe I had taken down a large deer using only an ox-horn bow. I promised to bring him a deer leg later as thanks for his past kindness. He warned me once more to quit gambling and treat my wife right, and I sincerely promised him that I would. As I walked through the rest of the village, neighbors stared at me with shock and envy. Seeing me carry such a valuable hunt, they whispered among themselves, wondering if the notorious village gambler had truly turned his life around. Carrying the Sika deer back into the courtyard, I overheard a heartbreaking conversation between my wife, Liu Sisi, and her younger sister, Liu Yanyan. Weak and starving, Yanyan begged Sisi not to feed her too much, terrified that I would starve her again or sell her to pay off my debts. Their words cut deep into my heart. Knowing that empty apologies would mean nothing to them now, I vowed to prove my complete transformation through my actions. I called out to Sisi, telling her to cook a generous dinner tonight, because we were having venison. Both Sisi and Yanyan stared in complete shock when they saw the massive 100-pound deer lying in the yard. I quickly went to work with my hunting knife, expertly skinning, gutting, and deboning the animal just as my father had taught me. In less than an hour, I processed about 120 pounds of fresh meat, storing most of it safely in the cellar while bringing 5 pounds of venison, offal, and deer blood into the kitchen. Working side by side with Sisi, the kitchen soon filled with the rich aroma of deer blood rice, stewed venison, and offal soup. When we sat down to eat, Yanyan stared anxiously at the food, too afraid to touch it, until I warmly encouraged her to dig in. I also picked up a piece of meat and placed it directly into Sisi's bowl. Sisi lowered her head and ate in silence, feeling deeply confused by my sudden kindness. Instead of feeling relieved, she grew even more worried, suspecting this was just another wicked scheme to butter them up before doing something terrible, just like when I tricked her out of her family heirloom or tried to sell Yanyan. My reborn body had developed a massive appetite, and I happily polished off 3 bowls of rice, along with several pounds of meat. Seeing Yanyan put her chopsticks down after barely eating, I urged her to eat more. Blushing with fear, she looked at me pitifully and begged me not to sell her, promising she would eat less every meal if only I let her stay. I reassured my young sister-in-law, Yanyan, swearing that I would never sell her again and encouraging her to eat as much as she wanted. Relief washed over her, and she happily dug into the meal. I also urged my wife, Sisi, to eat more. Though she silently complied, she remained wary of my sudden shift in behavior. Meanwhile, outside our courtyard, Song Erhe arrived with 2 notorious local thugs, Wang Bao, a huge bearded man, and Zhang Xiang, a heavy-set guy with a shaved head. Song Erhe had enticed them with promises of taking Sisi and Yanyan away to pay off my supposed gambling debt. Hearing the commotion, I picked up my ox-horn bow and arrows and stepped outside to confront them. When Song Erhe threatened to break my legs, I raised my bow and warned them not to take another step into my yard. Seeing my weapon, the 3 thugs hesitated. Inside the house, Sisi and Yanyan watched nervously, terrified of what might happen. Wang Bao tried to bluff, egging Song Erhe on to step forward. When Zhang Qiang kicked Song Erhe from behind, causing him to stumble ahead, I instantly drew my bow to full draw. The menacing sound of the tightening bowstring froze Song Erhe in his tracks. Just then, my neighbor, Uncle Fugi, and his son, Yukai, rushed over after hearing the noise. Uncle Fugi's family had always been close with my late father, and Yukai was my childhood friend. They boldly stepped up to defend me, confronting Song Erhe for bringing outside thugs to bully me. Other neighbors gathered at a distance to watch, though they were too intimidated by Wang Bao and Zhang Qiang to intervene. I pointed out to the crowd that Song Era had cheated me during the card game. When he demanded evidence, I turned it back on him, asking for proof of my debt and demanding to see an IOU. Knowing that I had faked being drunk that night and never signed anything, I knew he had no paper trail. Realizing they were losing the verbal argument, Wang Bao and Zhang Qiang lost their patience and decided to use force to beat me into submission. Wang Bao believed I was just putting on a show, so he and Zhang Qiang charged at me while shoving Song Erhe forward. Coldly watching them move, I rapidly fired 3 consecutive arrows. The arrows landed right at their feet, burying themselves deep into the frozen dirt, with only the feathers vibrating. The terrifying power and sheer accuracy of my shots instantly froze the 3 thugs in their tracks. Drenched in cold sweat, Wang Bao and Zhang Qiang realized that taking one more step meant taking an arrow to the head. Behind them, Song Erhe was so utterly terrified by the near miss that he wet his pants. Realizing I wasn't messing around, Song Erhe burst into tears, admitted I owed him nothing, and fled in disgrace. Finding themselves outnumbered and outmatched by my raw strength, Wang Bao and Zhang Qiang muttered a quick threat and slunk away as well. Inside the house, Cici and Yanyan watched in disbelief as I effortlessly drove the bullies away. The watching neighbors were equally stunned, while Uncle Fugi and Yukai stared in awe at the tremendous power behind my archery. After the crowd dispersed, I went down to the cellar, cut off a large deer leg along with a few pounds of deer offal, and presented it to Uncle Fugui. He tried to refuse, knowing money and food were tight for my household, but I insisted. I reminded him how much he and Yukai had helped me since my father passed away. Touched by my gratitude, Uncle Fugui accepted the meat and noted to his son that I truly seemed to have turned over a new leaf. After seeing them off, I stepped back into the house, where Cici and Yanyan were still processing everything. I told them to keep enjoying their meal, while I headed out to take care of a few more errands. After leaving my house, I picked up my damaged oxhorn bow, a fresh deer leg, and a basin of deer blood to visit Old Man Song. He lives alone and is the only skilled craftsman in the village who knows how to repair oxhorn bows. Since I overexerted the bowstring while scaring off the thugs earlier, the splints were cracked and needed proper reinforcement. Old Man Song agreed to repair it for me by noon the next day. To show my appreciation, I offered him the deer blood, and he invited me to drink deer blood wine with him. As we drank, he warmly urged me to stay away from gambling and live a good, honest life with my wife. Touched by his genuine care, I promised him that I had truly changed my ways for good. It was late at night by the time I returned home, smelling of alcohol. When Cici opened the door, she flinched and took a step back in fear, clearly anticipating the usual beatings I inflicted whenever I drank. Seeing her dread broke my heart. To give her space and peace of mind, I asked if the kitchen was cleared and quietly told her that I would sleep alone in the side room tonight. Surprised by my sudden restraint, Cici silently watched me walk away. Lying in the side room, my heightened senses allowed me to overhear the sisters chatting on the heated bed in the master room. Yanyan naively defended me, pointing out how I beat up Song Erhe to protect Cici, fed them meat, and swore never to sell her again. However, Cici gently warned her not to trust a gambler's oath, reminding her of the painful marks on her body from earlier that morning, and suggesting that my kindness might just be a trap. Hearing Cici's lingering fear and distrust filled me with guilt, but I knew I had to give her time to see that I was truly a changed man. I woke up early, intending to make breakfast for my wife and sister-in-law, but Cici was already up and busy in the kitchen. When I urged her to use more rice and promised to cut fresh venison, she quietly reminded me that we barely had half a bag of rice left. In late 1979, our village was transitioning under early trial reforms, but our household relied entirely on the land managed by the 2 women. I reassured her that I would handle our food supply and dumped a generous portion of rice into the pot. Down in the cellar, I cut 3 pounds of venison, only to realize we were almost out of salt and completely out of cooking lard. At the breakfast table, Yanyan happily ate her fill of meat. When I offered to support both of them through hunting, so they wouldn't have to break their backs farming, Cici was surprised. However, she remained skeptical, believing no hunter could consistently bring home large game. she softly insisted that she and Yan Yan would keep managing the fields anyway. While eating, I noticed Cece's worn-out coat covered in patches and holes, with no spare clothes to change into. Yan Yan was wearing a heavily patched coat that once belonged to my late mother. Seeing their pitiful state filled me with deep sorrow, and I vowed to find a way to secure proper supplies and warm clothing for them immediately. Knowing that farming wouldn't solve our immediate poverty, I decided my time was best spent hunting. I gathered my arrows, grabbed my hunting knife, and headed to Old Man Song's house early in the morning. Old Man Song greeted me with a smile, revealing that the deer blood wine had kept him up half the night, so he had spent those hours fully repairing my oxhorn bow. Handing over the bow, which now looked brand new, he easily guessed my intentions and asked if I was heading back into the mountains today. After getting my fully repaired oxhorn bow from Old Man Song, I heeded his warnings to be careful in the harsh winter woods and headed straight into the mountains. With food scarce, many villagers had hunted the area heavily, making game difficult to find. My tracking skills were still basic, and after losing the trail of a snow hare, I realized how useful it would be to tame a hawk or falcon. If I could train a raptor to act as my aerial scout, I could combine its view with my ability to understand bird language to locate game effortlessly. As the freezing wind blew, I listened to the local sparrows chirping in the trees. Although they mostly babbled about the bitter cold, I managed to gather that a family of roe deer had recently frozen to death in the snow. I continued deeper into the forest, stopping around noon to eat a piece of cooked venison while scouting from a tall tree branch. From my high perch, I spotted a fresh set of footprints resembling maple leaves about 100 meters away. Recognizing them as wild boar tracks, I quickly slid down and rushed over to investigate. A heavy snowfall began to blanket the forest, threatening to erase the prints entirely. I lost the trail near a small mound where a mini snowslide had occurred, but just as frustration set in, 2 magpies flew overhead. They chirped about 2 wild boars mating down at the foot of the mountain. I carefully made my way down to the base of the slope and spotted the pair in an open clearing. A male and a female boar, each weighing around 200 pounds, were caught completely off guard. Knowing this was my best opportunity, I checked the wind. An army crawled through the deep snow until I was within 150 meters. Positioning myself quietly, I knocked 2 arrows into my heavy 10-stone oxhorn bow at once, determined to take down both boars simultaneously. I pulled the bowstring back to a full moon shape and released the arrows. Intimidated and stuck together, the 2 wild boars could not react in time. The arrows cut through the air and struck both targets squarely, sending their agonizing squeals echoing through the snowy forest. My double shot struck both targets. The arrow hit the sow directly in the head, killing her instantly, while the second arrow wounded the male boar in the flank. The boar broke away and bolted into the dense forest. I quickly gave chase, using my enhanced speed to keep him in sight. Even after taking another arrow to his rear at a range of 200 meters, the boar kept running wildly. I pursued him at full speed for 2 kilometers until he finally collapsed from blood loss, allowing me to finish him off with a final arrow to the head. I hoisted the male boar, which weighed over 200 pounds, onto my back and retraced my steps to retrieve the sow. Dragging one boar in my hand while carrying the other on my shoulder, I trudged back toward the village under the cover of night. When I kicked open the courtyard gate, my sister-in-law Yan Yan ran out to greet me, relieved that I had returned safely. Cece followed behind and gasped in complete astonishment at the sight of 2 massive wild boars. Seeing the blood on my clothes, Cece asked with genuine worry if I was hurt. Warmth filled my heart at her concern, and I quickly reassured her that the blood belonged entirely to the boars. I asked Cece and Yan Yan to boil water so we could process the game immediately. I planned to bring the boars to the town's supply and marketing cooperative early the next morning to sell them and buy much-needed household supplies. Since processing 2 whole pigs alone would take several hours, I walked over to my neighbor Uncle Fugi's house for extra help. Uncle Fugi, his wife, and my friend Yukai were stunned to hear that I had taken down 2 boars in a single day. Thrilled by my success, Uncle Fugi praised me for surpassing my late father's hunting skills. and the whole family readily agreed to come over and help with the slaughter. Uncle Fugi and his family arrived at my yard just as the water was boiling to help clean and process the game. Together, we spent 2 hours butchering the 2 wild boars, yielding around 330 pounds of meat and bones. To show my deep gratitude for their help over the years, I cut off a large pig trotter and gave Aunt Fugi plenty of pig offal and blood. In return, she happily brought over a jar of homemade sauerkraut. I insisted on making a big batch of slaughtered pig stew for everyone to enjoy together. As we shared a warm meal and sweet potato wine, Uncle Fugi scolded his son, Yukai, telling him to learn hunting skills from me. I gladly agreed to take Yukai into the mountains as my hunting partner, knowing that having a trusted helper would make capturing larger herds much easier. After Uncle Fugi's family went home, Cici and Yanyan cleaned up the dishes. Yanyan contentedly mentioned how long it had been since she last ate pig stew, and I promised her that we would have meat every day from now on. Before turning in for the night, I told Cici I would head out early to sell the meat. In the master bedroom, Yanyan again tried to convince Cici that I had truly changed for the better. But Cici remained cautious, whispering that only time would tell. At dawn, I went over to Uncle Fugui's house to borrow a handcart. I loaded the 2 butchered boars onto the cart and set off toward the town supply and marketing cooperative before breakfast. As I pushed the cart through the village, early rising neighbors stared in utter disbelief, asking endless questions about how I managed to bring down 2 huge boars right after hunting a deer. I gave them polite, vague answers and kept moving, leaving the envious villagers behind as news of my massive hunt spread like wildfire. I pushed my handcart with the 2 butchered wild boars for over an hour until I reached the Qingjiang Supply and Marketing Cooperative in town. The sight of 2 massive boars instantly made me the center of attention. When Director Wu Junhua came out to inspect the meat, he initially offered a low price of 1 yuan per pound. Knowing the value of wild game in the dead of winter, I stood my ground and successfully negotiated the price up to 1.2 yuan per pound. The total meat weighed 320 pounds, earning me a whopping 396 yuan. Since ration coupons were still required for purchasing restricted items, I pulled Director Wu aside to speak in private. I discreetly slipped him 5 yuan, pointing out that local restrictions were loosening under recent pilot reforms. He smiled, accepted the bribe, and agreed to make a one-time exception. I exchanged part of my earnings for cloth and food stamps, buying 18 feet of quality cotton fabric, 200 pounds of high-grade rice, plus essential supplies like rapeseed oil, salt, soy sauce, and sugar. Even after paying for everything and tipping the director, I walked away with a full cart of goods and 340 yuan in cash. I pushed the heavy cart back home around noon, calling out to my family as I arrived. Yanyan ran out first, her eyes widening in total disbelief at the mountain of supplies. I handed Cici the large bundle of cotton fabric, telling her that she and Yanyan no longer had to wear patched clothes. I proudly announced that we now had 340 yuan in savings and promised Yanyan that we would eat white rice, flour, and meat every single day. Cici was deeply surprised by the vast amount of money and supplies, but she gently reminded me to spend wisely. Though she appreciated that I noticed their worn-out clothes, her heart remained guarded. Remembering the months of abuse she suffered, she secretly worried that I might return to gambling tomorrow, resolving to stay cautious and keep observing my behavior. After unloading the supplies, I told Cici to cook a generous lunch with venison and pork intestines. At the table, I urged Cici to eat more to regain her health. However, my casual comment about her losing weight accidentally reminded her of the past abuse she suffered at my hands. Seeing her stiff smile, I felt a deep pang of regret. Meanwhile, Yanyan happily devoured the food, delighted to taste soy sauce for the first time in months. I advised them to stay home from the fields that afternoon and focus on sewing new winter coats. After lunch, I brought pig offal and blood to Old Man Song's house as a gift. He praised my incredible luck in hunting 2 wild boars back-to-back, comparing me to his younger self, and sternly reminded me to stay away from gambling. I assured him that my gambling days were over. I then asked if he could help me acquire a goshawk chick or falcon. My 2 hunting trips had taught me that I desperately needed an aerial scout to spot game over large areas, and my ability to speak bird language would make a falcon the ultimate hunting partner. Old Man Song warned me that training and feeding a meat-eating bird was expensive, but seeing my determination, he agreed to contact his network of experienced hunters to help me find a chick. I returned home to find Cece and Yan Yan gone. Realizing some fabric was missing, I knew they had taken it to the village brigade's shared sewing machine to make clothes. At the sewing room, the sisters ran into Aunt Guihua, the mother of the Song Dahu brothers I had beaten up earlier. While mending an old coat covered in dozens of patches, Aunt Guihua spotted the large stack of quality fabric in Cece's arms. Green with envy, she offered to help them sew the coats in exchange for half a foot of cotton cloth. When my wife Cece and her sister Yan Yan brought our stack of new fabric to the village sewing room, Aunt Guihua offered to help sew the coats in exchange for half a foot of cloth. Knowing it was an outrageous demand, Cece politely declined, stating that they could handle the sewing themselves. Green with envy over our good fortune, Aunt Guihua began gossiping. She feigned sympathy for Cece, bringing up my past gambling, beatings, and attempt to sell Yan Yan. Aunt Guihua maliciously tried to sow discord between us. She warned Cece that my streak of good luck in hunting wouldn't last, predicting that I would soon gamble away all the money from the wild boars. She urged Cece to demand control of the earnings, and suggested she save up money to eventually run away, remarry, or return to the city. While Yan Yan felt angry on my behalf, Cece remained composed. Though she had considered leaving me in the past when I mistreated her, my recent dramatic change had made her hold onto her own sense of propriety. Cece firmly cut Aunt Guihua off, telling her that she would stand by her husband and that it was none of her business. After Aunt Guihua left in frustration, Cece decided they would sew 4 new sets of winter coats first. Yan Yan pointed out that there were only 3 of us, but Cece gently explained that since my clothes get dirty while hunting in the mountains, she wanted to make 2 sets specifically for me. Yan Yan playfully teased her sister for caring about me, making Cece blush. Meanwhile, I spent the afternoon at home chopping firewood to keep our heated brick bed warm for the night. Around 5 in the afternoon, I prepared a delicious dinner of potato-stewed venison, stir-fried pork offal, and cabbage. When the sisters returned, Yan Yan excitedly cheered for the meat. I chuckled, mentioning that after 3 straight days of venison, I was almost getting tired of it and needed to hunt different game next time to mix things up. I then warmly asked Cece how the sewing was coming along. After dinner, I checked with Old Man Song, but there was still no news regarding the falcon chicks. Returning home, I went to the side room, took out 300 yuan from my wild boar earnings, and kept 40 yuan for myself. I knocked on the master bedroom door to give the 300 yuan to Cece for safekeeping. When Cece opened the door, she flinched, fearing I was coming to abuse her again. Surprised by the stack of cash, she hesitated, wondering if I had truly changed, or if it was just an act out of guilt. I handed her the money, telling her that she was now in charge of our household finances, and that we would save up to rebuild our old ancestral house. After I returned to my room, Yan Yan angrily told Cece that Aunt Guihua was just trying to sow discord between us because she couldn't stand seeing our family do well. Listening through the wall, my expression darkened. I realized Aunt Guihua was exploiting my past abuse and bad habits to drive a wedge between my wife and me. That night, both Cece and I tossed and turned, filled with restless thoughts. I knew regaining her complete trust would take time, as the hurt I caused ran deep. The next morning, Cece prepared a wonderful breakfast of white flour pork buns, millet porridge, and leftover venison. I told her and Yan Yan to stay home and focus on sewing the winter coats instead of pushing themselves too hard in the freezing fields. When I mentioned heading back into the mountains to hunt more game for our new home, Cece surprised me by gently telling me to be careful and return early. Touched by her concern, I promised to take care of her for the rest of my life. She handed me a basket of fresh pork buns for my trip and scolded me for saying anything unlucky. When I happily called her my wife, a faint blush appeared on her cheeks, and her quiet silence felt like a sweet step forward. After finishing breakfast, I packed some pork buns, a water kettle, my oxhorn bow, and a hunting knife before heading over to Uncle Fugi's house. I invited Uncle Fugi and his son Yukai to join me on my hunting trip today. Knowing how difficult it was to handle large herds alone, I knew having reliable partners would make our hunts far more productive. Both of them eagerly agreed, and within half an hour, the three of us set off into the sunny, snow-covered mountains. After walking for over an hour without spotting any game, Uncle Fugi suggested setting a trap. He and Yukai skillfully set up a wire snare in a dense thicket frequented by wild boars, disguising it with half a cabbage as bait. Although setting snares relied mostly on luck, it was better than wandering blindly through the deep snow. By noon, we still had come up empty-handed, despite following a few faint hare and deer tracks. We decided to take a break on the side of a small earthen mound. I pulled out my fresh pork buns and shared them with Uncle Fugi and Yukai. As we ate and chatted, my sharp hearing picked up the faint clucking of wild pheasants coming from several hundred meters away on the other side of the slope. I quietly motioned for them to stay silent, grabbed my bow and arrows, and rushed up the mound. Sure enough, about 200 meters away, 4 wild pheasants were foraging in the snow. My modified 10-stone oxhorn bow had an effective range of up to 250 meters, making this shot completely doable. Assessing the wind direction and calculating their movements, I knocked 4 arrows onto the bowstring, all at once. Behind me, Uncle Fugi and Yukai scrambled up the slope and stared in absolute shock as I pulled the heavy bow to full draw with incredible power. With a powerful twang of the bowstring, all 4 arrows shot through the air, simultaneously, toward the unsuspecting pheasants 200 meters away. My 4 simultaneous arrows hit all 4 wild pheasants, skewering them instantly. Uncle Fugi and Yukai climbed the slope and gasped in utter disbelief. They marveled at how my bow possessed far better accuracy and range at 200 meters than their standard hunting shotguns. I retrieved the 4 birds, each weighing between 3 and 5 pounds, securing a guaranteed harvest for our day. Yukai eagerly asked how I trained to shoot so well, and I explained that immense physical strength was the key to handling the heavy 10-stone oxhorn bow. By 2 in the afternoon, we still had not found any other big game. Just as Uncle Fugi suggested, we prepared to head back before dark. A group of magpies flew overhead. Listening to their chatter, I learned about a nearby valley, where a recent avalanche had exposed a steep slope covered in green weeds, wild vegetables, and dormant insects. Recognizing that fresh greenery exposed amidst deep snow would act as an irresistible magnet for hungry winter herbivores, I took off at top speed following the birds. I sprinted 3 kilometers ahead, leaving Uncle Fugi and Yukai far behind. Reaching the edge of the large valley, I looked down to see birds feeding on the steep slope and several roe deer already happily grazing on the exposed wild vegetables. Instead of shooting the deer right away, I realized this entire slope was a perfect natural trap that could potentially draw in even larger, more valuable game. Deciding to set up an ambush with my partners, I turned back and met up with Uncle Fugi and Yukai, who were gasping for air from trying to chase after me. I explained that I had discovered a valley with an avalanche slope full of exposed greenery and roe deer. Being an experienced hunter, Uncle Fugi immediately grasped how deadly a bait that slope would be in the dead of winter. With renewed excitement, I led them back toward the valley so we could lay in wait for a massive haul. I led Uncle Fugi and Yukai to the edge of the avalanche valley. Yukai spotted the roe deer grazing on the exposed greenery and wanted to shoot them immediately, but I stopped him. I explained that firing now would scare away larger game and leave our scent behind. Uncle Fugi agreed that patience was key, so the 3 of us hid behind a large rock to ambush any bigger prey that might arrive. By 4 in the afternoon, no large animals had appeared, and the sky began to darken. Yukai grew anxious, pointing out that, if we waited any longer, we would have to spend the night in the dangerous forest, where wolves and tigers roamed. Uncle Fugi hesitated, but I firmly declared my decision to stay overnight. The exposed greenery was a rare natural bait, and I was confident that my heavy oxhorn bow could keep us safe. I told them they were free to head back if they felt unsafe, as I didn't want to force them into danger. Seeing my unshakable confidence and thinking about the high cost of getting his son married, Uncle Fugi gritted his teeth and decided to stay with me, declaring that wealth is born from taking risks. Yukai bravely agreed to stand by us as well. I pointed to a cluster of large trees nearby, suggesting we sleep elevated in the branches for safety. Around 5 in the afternoon, as twilight settled, my sharp ears caught a sudden noise. At the top of the steep avalanche slope, a blue sheep appeared, followed by a second, a third, and soon a whole herd of over 20 blue sheep. Known for their incredible cliff-climbing skills, the sheep moved onto the rocky slope to graze on the wild vegetables. Uncle Fugui and Yukai were flushed with excitement, realizing that taking the risk had paid off beyond our wildest dreams. With the other sides of the valley blocked by deep snow, I quickly laid out a hunting strategy. I instructed Uncle Fugui and Yukai to take position on the left and right sides below, while I climbed to the top of the valley to block the sheep's main escape route. We agreed on a 3-pronged ambush. I instructed Uncle Fugi and Yukai to attack together on my signal before crouching low and making my way toward the top of the valley. Uncle Fugui and Yukai carefully approached the avalanche slope from the left and right, taking cover behind rocks. Below us, over 20 blue sheep were peacefully grazing on the exposed weeds. Once everyone was in position, I drew my oxhorn bow, nocked 3 arrows at once, and aimed at the nearest sheep about 100 meters away. The moment I released my arrows, Uncle Fugui and Yukai opened fire with their shotguns. The sudden gunshots panicked the herd, sending them leaping down the steep slope. My 3 arrows struck true, sending 3 sheep tumbling into the valley. As the herd scattered, shooting multiple arrows simultaneously became too difficult, so I switched to firing precise single shots. I dropped a sheep mid-leap at a distance of 180 meters, with a shot straight to its head. Uncle Fugi successfully killed a sheep, though Yukai missed his first shot. I carefully jumped down the slope to get a better angle, picking off sheep as they tried to scramble through the deep snowdrifts. Because there were only 3 of us to surround the area, 7 or 8 sheep managed to break through, but after a half-hour hunt, the chaotic scene finally settled. As darkness fell, I collected my spent arrows while we hauled all the fallen game out from the bottom of the valley. Thanks to my enhanced strength, I easily carried 2 sheep at a time. When we gathered all the spoils, Yukai counted a staggering total of 18 blue sheep. Each adult sheep weighed around 80 to 100 pounds, meaning a fortune in both meat and valuable wool. Checking the kill wounds, Uncle Fugui noted that I had taken down 11 sheep by myself, while he got 4 and Yukai got 3. When I offered to divide the haul 10 to 8, Uncle Fugui firmly refused to take advantage of me. We ultimately agreed to split the harvest according to our actual kills, leaving 11 sheep for me and 7 for Uncle Fugi and his son. Uncle Fugui and I buried the 18 blue sheep beneath a thick blanket of snow to cover the heavy smell of blood. Yukai gathered dry wood and built a roaring campfire to keep us warm through the freezing night. Sitting around the fire, we finished the last of our dry rations. We agreed to divide night watches, with Uncle Fugui and Yukai keeping watch during the first half, and Uncle Fugui joining me for the second half. As the night deepened, Uncle Fugui sighed, worrying about how frantic our families must be back in the village. I fell silent, wondering if Cece was truly worried about me, or if she simply didn't care. Back in Song Family Village, Cece stood at the door staring into the dark yard, heating up dinner over and over again. Yan Yan grew increasingly anxious, fearing I had fallen victim to hungry winter wolves or tigers. Cece scolded her sister for uttering such unlucky thoughts, insisting I was just on my way back. Yet, deep down, she was terrified. She knew that as flawed as I was still the pillar of the household, and she didn't want anything bad to happen to me. By 8 in the evening, Aunt Fugui rushed into our yard in a panic. Learning that none of us had returned, she realized we had gone hunting together. She warned Cece that we were either trapped in the mountains, spending a dangerous night outdoors, or worse, met with a fatal accident. Hearing this, Cece turned pale with fear. By 10 o'clock at night, the 3 women could no longer sit still. They rushed through the dark to the village chief's house, knocking on his door for help. Crying bitterly, Aunt Fugui begged him to gather the men to search the mountains. Cece stood by her side, her eyes red with anxiety as she feared for my life. However, the village chief gently explained that searching deep mountains in total darkness was far too dangerous and impractical for the villagers. He promised that if we didn't return by dawn, he would immediately organize a search party to go into the mountains at first light. Back in the village, Cece pleaded with the village chief to organize a search party, but he gently refused, explaining that searching the deep mountains at night was far too dangerous for anyone. She had no choice but to pray silently for my safety. Deep in the dark mountains, Uncle Fugui sat by the dying campfire keeping watch. As drowsiness crept up on him, a gray wolf crept up silently just 5 meters behind his back, while dozens of glowing green eyes emerged from the pitch-black woods. Perched high in a nearby tree, my heightened senses picked up the danger immediately. I opened my eyes, stood on a branch, drawn my bow, and shouted a warning to Uncle Fugui. The gray wolf lunged at him, but before it could reach him, I released an arrow that pierced its neck and pinned it to the snow. Terrified, Uncle Fugui scrambled toward the tree where Yukai was stationed. 2 more wolves charged at his back. Yukai fired a desperate shot and missed, afraid of hitting his father. I quickly fired 2 arrows simultaneously, striking both wolves dead and giving Uncle Fugui enough time to climb up to safety. A pack of at least 20 wolves completely surrounded our 2 trees. Since wolves couldn't climb, we held the high ground. Utilizing my night vision, I fired continuous arrows alongside Uncle Fugui and Yukai's shotgun blasts. Within minutes, 7 or 8 wolves lay dead in the snow. Intimidated by our firepower, the remaining dozen wolves retreated into the dark, maintaining a tense standoff about 100 meters away. Looking through my quiver, I realized I only had 7 arrows left. Uncle Fugui had 10 shotgun rounds, and Yukai had only 6. We agreed to conserve our limited ammunition and hold our positions until dawn. As time passed, the campfire gradually died out without anyone to add wood, plunging the entire snowfield into complete darkness. Plunged into complete darkness as the campfire died, Yukai and Uncle Fugui grew anxious. Hearing rustling nearby, Uncle Fugui realized that wolves were digging up the snow to steal our buried blue sheep. To conserve our limited shotgun ammunition, I told them to hold their fire and let me handle it. Using my enhanced night vision and sharp hearing, I spotted a wolf digging in the snow about 10 meters away. I drew my oxhorn bow and fired a single shot directly through its head. As a second wolf tried to flee in panic, I quickly fired another arrow, dropping it in its tracks. Yukai and Uncle Fugui stared in absolute awe at how accurately I could strike targets in total darkness. An hour later, under the cover of night, 7 or 8 wolves tried to sneak up on our haul again. I picked up my bow and rapidly shot 3 more wolves dead, sending the rest running in terror. Uncle Fugui praised me as a one-man army capable of holding the pass against a whole horde. However, I warned them that I was down to my final 4 arrows, though I reassured them that we still had our firearms to fall back on. Half an hour later, 4 or 5 wolves made a desperate final attempt, and I picked off 2 more. Having lost more than half of their original pack, the remaining wolves finally accepted defeat and slunk away into the wilderness. With 1 or 2 hours left until dawn, no more threats appeared. Uncle Fugui warned us to remain vigilant, as wolves were clever enough to feign a retreat and wait in ambush. As dawn finally broke, revealing a clear, empty snowfield, the 3 of us let out a massive sigh of relief. Facing the challenge of hauling 18 blue sheep and a dozen wolf carcasses back home, Uncle Fugui suggested we build a simple makeshift sled. I agreed, and while Uncle Fugui and Yukai set to work, I kept a sharp lookout, knowing the heavy smell of blood around our camp could still attract dangerous predators like leopards or tigers. At dawn, my wife, Liu Cece, and her sister, Yan Yan, headed straight to Aunt Fugi's house without eating breakfast. Neither of them had slept a wink all night, terrified that I had met with a fatal accident in the snowy woods. Cece tried her best to comfort herself, holding on to hope that I was merely delayed. Aunt Fugui, her eyes red from crying, took Cece and Yan Yan to see the village chief. Keeping his promise, the village chief gathered the villagers at the entrance of the village, appealing to everyone to send 1 or 2 men from each household to form a search party into the mountains for Uncle Fugui, Yukai, and me. In the crowd, the brothers Song Dahu and Song Erhu secretly gloated. Still bitter over the beating I gave them and their broken shotguns, they assumed we had already been devoured by wild beasts. Seeking petty revenge, Song Dahu spoke up loudly to sabotage the rescue effort. He argued that searching the mountains was dangerous and unfair to the rest of the village, pointing out that I hadn't shared my deer or wild boar profits with anyone. So no one owed us a rescue. His mother, Aunt Guihua, immediately backed him up, shouting that her sons wouldn't risk their lives for us. Aunt Fugi furiously scolded Song Dahu for kicking us while we were down, but the damage was done. Tears streamed down Cece's face as she begged the villagers to help, fearing no one would step up. Seeing Song Dahu refuse, several other selfish villagers quickly made up excuses about work or farm duties to back out as well. The village chief grew deeply embarrassed and disappointed by their cold-heartedness, sternly warning the crowd that turning a blind eye to a neighbor in need would destroy the unity of our entire village. Half an hour after gathering, the village chief was deeply disappointed to see that only 17 or 18 men had shown up to join the search party, including Old Man Song. The cold indifference of the absent villagers weighed heavily on Cece and Aunt Fugui. Nevertheless, the village chief reassured them, and the search party set off into the mountains. Old Man Song took charge, guiding the group along the main hunting route while everyone called out our names. As they walked, Old Man Song comforted Cece, reminding her of my exceptional strength and archery skills. When Yanyan mentioned how I had intimidated the local thugs by shooting arrows deep into the frozen ground, Old Man Song was stunned, realizing I possessed rare, natural superhuman strength. By 11 in the morning, the search party had ventured deep into the wilderness without finding any trace of us. Feeling anxious, Cece asked Old Man Song what would happen if we weren't found by afternoon. He gently explained that if we found nothing by 4 o'clock, the group would have to return home to avoid being trapped in the dark. Meanwhile, on a distant slope, I was single-handedly hauling a makeshift sled loaded with nearly 2,000 pounds of blue sheep, while Uncle Fugi and Yukai pulled a second sled packed with wolf carcasses. As I crested the ridge to go back and help them, my sharp eyesight caught a group of people resting below. I instantly recognized Cece, the village chief, and Old Man Song. Realizing they had organized a search party out of concern for our safety filled my heart with immense warmth. I shouted Cece's name and ran toward them. Seeing me alive and unharmed, Cece burst into tears of overwhelming relief. The village chief let out a long sigh of joy, and the surrounding searchers cheered as they spotted Uncle Fugui and Yukai hauling the second sled right behind me. I ran up to the search party, and Yanyan immediately told me how Cece had cried all night and begged the village chief to organize a rescue. Feeling deep guilt for making my wife worry, I apologized and explained that we had stumbled upon a herd of sheep at dusk and were forced to spend the night in the mountains. Seeing that we were all safe, the village chief laughed with relief. I thanked everyone for their kindness, promising to treat them to meat and wine, and asked if they could help us haul our massive hunt back down. When the villagers crested the slope and saw 18 blue sheep on one sled and 11 dead gray wolves on another, they were frozen in total shock. Old Man Song gasped at the sight of the wolves, amazed that 3 men could survive a pack attack and slay 11 of them. Aunt Fugui playfully twisted her husband's ear in tears, scolding him for endangering his life, which brought laughter to the crowd. Standing beside me, Cece looked into my eyes with deep concern and made me promise never to take such deadly risks or spend the night in the mountains again. Looking at her anxious face, I earnestly promised to keep myself safe. With the help of over a dozen villagers, we carried the game back to the village in 2 hours. The sight of everyone carrying a sheep or wolf caused an instant sensation throughout the village. Meanwhile, at Song Dahu's house, he was busy telling his brother that I was probably dead and urging him to go after my sister-in-law. When Aunt Guihua rushed in to announce that we had returned completely unharmed with 18 sheep and 11 wolves, both brothers jumped out of their chairs in utter disbelief, feeling thoroughly humiliated. Back at my house, the courtyard was bustling with joy. To express my gratitude to the villagers who volunteered to search for us, I invited them and their families over for a feast tonight. Since we planned to sell the blue sheep, I offered to host the dinner using fresh wolf meat and sheep offal, with plenty of spices to handle the gamey flavor. We prepared to celebrate our massive victory together. The villagers were overjoyed when they learned that tonight's feast would feature wolf meat and sheep offal soup, and that their families were invited as well. Before we could eat, everyone helped load the 18 blue sheep onto handcarts. Uncle Fugui, several villagers, and I pushed the loaded carts toward the Qingjiang Town Supply and Marketing Cooperative. Our arrival in town drew a large crowd. Director Wu Junhua was stunned to see 18 blue sheep, teasingly asking if I had stumbled into a sheep den. I negotiated a price of 1.2 yuan per pound for the mutton and 12 yuan per pound for the wool. After weighing everything, my 11 sheep yielded 770 pounds of pure meat, earning me 924 yuan. Wool sales added 50 yuan. Uncle Fugui earned 576 yuan for his 7 sheep. Combining this payout with my previous earnings, my total savings climbed to nearly 1,400 yuan. I had officially become a 1,000 yuan household, making our family the wealthiest in Song family village. Uncle Fugui bought daily necessities and walked with a proud swagger, overjoyed that Yukai now had enough money to get married. Remembering my promise to Cici, I resolved never to spend another night in the mountains, no matter how tempting the prey. By evening, we returned home to a courtyard filled with the mouth-watering aroma of stewed wolf meat and hot sheep offal soup prepared under Old Man Song's expert guidance. I brought out several jars of erguotu liquor to share. Over a dozen families gathered across my yard and Uncle Fugui's house, filling the tables with laughter and cheer. Sitting at the main table with the village chief, Old Man Song, and Uncle Fugui, I raised my bowl high to thank them for leading the search party. The village chief smiled and toasted back, celebrating an unforgettable night of unity and success. As the tempting aroma of our feast drifted across the village, the children of families who refused to help search for us threw tantrums, begging their mothers for meat. I understood the fickleness of human nature. I held no grudges, but I certainly was no pushover. I only welcomed those who stood by us in our hour of need. The banquet ended around 9 in the evening, with the guest families happily taking home leftover wolf meat and sheep offal soup. Before leaving, Old Man Song pulled me aside to share great news. An old friend of his was raising falcon chicks, and he promised to take me to see them tomorrow. I was thrilled, knowing that a falcon scout would make daytime hunting far easier and eliminate the need to ever spend another night in the mountains. After the guests departed and the women finished cleaning up, I went inside and handed Cici 900 yuan from today's mutton sales. Looking at the thick stack of cash, Cici stood dazed, realizing our family had suddenly become the wealthiest household in the village. She gently suggested that I keep the money, as long as I promised never to gamble again. I firmly pressed the cash into her hands, reassuring her that my gambling days were long gone. Relieved, Cici urged me never to spend the night outdoors while hunting again, emphasizing that my safety mattered far more than any game. She even suggested I stop hunting altogether now that we had savings. I reassured her that I would never take overnight risks again, but explained that daytime hunting with partners was essential for building our future wealth. Exhausted, I prepared to sleep, and Cici kindly brought a wooden basin of hot water to my side room for me to wash my feet. Touched, I softly thanked her, catching her off guard since I had never spoken so gently before. Watching her retreat to the door, I considered asking her to stay, but I quickly checked myself. I knew that forcing anything now would destroy the trust I was trying so hard to rebuild. Back in the master bedroom, Yanyan teasingly asked if Cici finally believed I had turned over a new leaf. Cici blushed and turned away, pretending to sleep, though she still couldn't fathom what had triggered my sudden transformation. She was slowly beginning to accept the change. I woke up to a delicious, hot breakfast prepared by my wife, feeling a deep pang of past regret for how I had mistreated her. I thanked her and mentioned that I wouldn't be hunting today because I was heading to Old Man Song's house to see some goshawk chicks. I noticed that after days of eating meat, both Cici and Yanyan had regained healthy color in their faces, making all my hard work feel completely worthwhile. At the table, I subtly glanced at Cece, but Yanyan playfully called me out for peeking. Blushing deeply, I quickly changed the subject, suggesting we slaughter a couple of wild pheasants for dinner tonight, since Cece and I were tired of venison and mutton offal. Cece quietly agreed, and after finishing my meal, I hurried over to Old Man Song's house. Together, we walked for half an hour to Zhao family village to visit Zhao Minxing, a renowned veteran hunter and falconer in his 60s. Inside his side yard, 3 two-month-old goshawk chicks with pale yellow feathers were screeching in their cage. Zhao Minsheng explained that these chicks could already fly and had already received basic hunting training from him. He warned me that taming an eagle at this age was extremely difficult because it had already bonded with him, making it hard to transfer its loyalty to a new master. I asked when he might catch new chicks, but he admitted it was unpredictable since eagle nests were hidden high on steep cliffs. Unwilling to waste precious time waiting, I decided to take the risk and buy one right away. Since I was introduced by Old Man Song, Zhao Minsheng agreed to sell a goshawk chick for 10 yuan and teach me his family's secret falconry techniques for an additional 10 yuan. Though Old Man Song grumbled at the 20 yuan price tag, I readily accepted. With the deal settled, Zhao Minsheng began explaining the very first crucial step, the art of eagle training. Master Zhao explained the eagle training process to me in detail. The most critical stage is breaking the bird's spirit. By placing the goshawk chick on a thick hemp rope, keeping it blindfolded and denying it sleep while constantly glaring into its eyes and imitating wild animal calls, the trainer wears down its pride. Over 3 to 7 days, a starving, exhausted eagle will eventually submit and accept food from its new master. Once it surrenders, basic call and response and hunting training can begin. I paid Master Zhao 20 yuan for the chick and his expert instruction, receiving a leather blindfold, tethering ropes, and a protective leather glove. Returning home, I informed my wife and sister-in-law that I would be locked in my room for the next few days taming the bird, asking them to leave meals outside my door. Down in my room, I set up the rope, placed fresh venison and water nearby, and removed the eagle's blindfold. The chick screeching angrily, trying to fly away and glaring back at me. Because I possessed the ability to understand bird language, I could clearly hear its internal complaints as it vowed never to submit to a human. After staring at it for 4 hours, I began imitating the roars of various wild predators to break its resolve. As I mimicked lions, leopards, and tigers, I listened closely to its reactions. To my surprise, my bird language ability revealed its exact fear. The chick was terrified specifically of tiger roars. Capitalizing on this secret weakness, I repeatedly mimicked deep, frightening tiger roars. Outside my room, Cece and Yanyan heard the strange sounds, wondering if I had gone mad. But Cece gently told her sister not to disturb my training. Inside, the relentless tiger roars broke the eagle's spirit far faster than traditional methods. By evening, the terrified chick showed clear signs of mental exhaustion. Determined to complete the process quickly, I stayed awake all night, letting out a sharp tiger roar every half hour to keep the chick from resting, driving it to complete exhaustion. I spent the next morning breaking the eagle's spirit, using tiger roars every time it tried to sleep. By evening, the young eagle completely broke down. Its fierce glare vanished, replaced by complete fear and submission. When I held out a piece of minced venison, it ate hungrily and drank water. I gently petted its head, and it affectionately rubbed against my hand. I named my newly tamed eagle Little Yellow. I stepped out of my room to eat dinner with Cece and Yanyan, revealing that the eagle was fully tamed after less than 2 days. Exhausted from staying up all night, I slept in my side room until 11 at night. Waking up to get water, I found Cece and Yanyan still up doing needlework in the living room. Cece handed me a newly finished winter coat, explaining that she had made 2 sets for me so I would have warm, clean clothes while hunting. I tried it on, and it fit perfectly. Touched by her care, I praised her skills, making her blush. I then went to my side room and retrieved a precious jade bracelet from under my pillow. It was a family heirloom belonging to Cece's mother, which I had previously stolen and pawned to Song Erhe for 10 yuan to cover my gambling debts. The previous afternoon, I had tracked down Song Erhe and bought it back. I placed the heirloom into Cece's hands, sincerely apologizing for my past crimes. Seeing her mother's bracelet brought Cece to tears, as it reminded her of her family and all the suffering she had endured since coming to the countryside. Overcome with guilt, I stepped forward and wrapped Cece in a gentle embrace, promising that I would spend the rest of my life making her happy and never let her down again. Though she stiffened at first, she stopped resisting and let me hold her. I gently put the bracelet onto her wrist and urged both sisters to stop staying up late and go to sleep. Watching them return to their room, I knew that rebuilding complete trust and intimacy with my wife would still take time. But this was a major step forward. I woke up from a sweet dream where Cece had fully forgiven me and invited me back to the main bedroom. Realizing the physical evidence of my dream left on my pants, I quickly changed my clothes and tossed them on a chair. After feeding little Yellow and enjoying a wonderful breakfast of pork buns with Cece and Yan, I returned to my room to test the falcon's loyalty. I closed the doors and untied its leg tether, letting it fly freely around the room. Listening to its bird language, I heard little Yellow express excitement over flying again without any desire to escape. Relief washed over me. The bird was truly loyal. A moment later, Cece knocked and entered to gather my old clothes for laundry. When she reached for my discarded pants, I awkwardly offered to wash them myself. Cece gently insisted that laundry was a woman's job and carried them out. Out in the courtyard, Yan picked up the pants to wash them, but Cece quickly grabbed them back, her face flushing red. As a married woman, Cece instantly understood why the pants were stained, knowing I had been holding back for a long time. Yan innocently asked what was wrong with the pants and why Cece was blushing. Cece made up a quick lie, claiming the falcon had peed on them, but Yan remained suspicious. Inside the house, my heightened hearing caught every word of their conversation, making my face burn with embarrassment. Wanting to escape the awkward situation, I grabbed my oxhorn bow, hunting knife, meat scraps, and little Yellow, calling out to Cece that I was heading into the mountains to train the eagle. Seeing me hurry out in a flustered rush, Cece burst into laughter. When Yan asked why she was laughing, Cece brushed her off by praising the nice weather, leaving her sister thoroughly confused. Still hearing their chatter from down the trail, I quickened my pace into the woods, eager to leave the embarrassment behind. By around noon, little Yellow and I had ventured deep into the mountains. I gently tossed my arm, sending little Yellow soaring into the sky to scout for prey. Since Master Zhao had already given the young goshawk a month of basic training, little Yellow knew to fly ahead, return to my arm every 10 minutes to rest, and then take off again as we traveled deeper into the wilderness. Farther ahead, an adorable adult sable was foraging in the snow. Little Yellow spotted it immediately from the high sky. Knowing it was still too small to hunt an adult sable on its own, little Yellow flew back 700 or 800 meters toward me, screeching eagerly to guide me to the prey. Hearing and understanding every word of its bird language, I was delighted that my falcon was proving useful on its very first outing. I pulled out my oxhorn bow and sprinted after little Yellow as it led the way. As I closed in to within 200 meters, the 40-centimeter sable sensed the aerial commotion and fled up a large tree trunk. It scrambled up the branches, preparing to leap across to a neighboring tree. Standard firearms and arrows usually fail against such agile, fast-moving creatures, but my heightened vision allowed me to lock onto its exact movement despite the 200-meter distance. Drawing my heavy oxhorn bow to full draw, I calculated the timing and released an iron-backed arrow. Just as the sable leapt through the air toward the third tree, my arrow struck it cleanly through the head, sending it falling straight to the snowy ground. Watching from above, little Yellow circled in shock, awed by my terrifying accuracy. I ran over and picked up the sable, overjoyed to find that the headshot had left its valuable dark brown fur completely intact. Known as one of the 3 traditional treasures of the Northeast, top-tier sable pelt was a luxury item that could easily sell for 300 to 400 yuan or more. Little Yellow hopped onto my leather glove, eagerly calling out to take credit for the successful hunt. I chuckled, patted its head, and fed it a generous portion of meat scraps as a reward. With little Yellow serving as my eyes in the sky and my ability to understand its calls, tracking down valuable game in the mountains had become easier than ever. While I was out hunting in the mountains, a woman knocked on our courtyard gate. Cautious of bullies while I was away, my wife Cece checked through the door before opening it to find her high school classmate, Hu Chiuli. Also an educated youth from the city who had married locally out of desperation, Hu Chiuli had dropped by while her family was away visiting relatives. Inside the house, Cece poured her a glass of water and had Yanyan start cooking lunch so Hu Chiuli could eat with them. Hu Chiuli revealed big news. The educated youth in our county would soon be allowed to return to the city. She excitedly declared that they would finally be able to escape their miserable lives in the countryside. When Cece asked if she planned to return to the city despite being married, Hu Chiuli spat through gritted teeth that she had suffered enough from cold, hunger, and abuse, revealing that her husband had recently beaten her over an egg. Cece asked if she would bring her young son along, but Hu Chiuli coldly refused, reasoning that raising a child in the city would prevent her from finding a job or remarrying. Hu Chiuli then urged Cece to abandon her marriage and leave with her, pointing out that Cece had suffered far worse abuse from her gambling husband, and that Cece didn't even have children tying her down. She argued that with Cece's beauty, finding a good husband and a job back in the city would be easy. Cece hesitated and held back. A week ago, she might have considered running away. But after witnessing my recent dramatic change of heart and how I cared for her, she no longer had any desire to divorce or remarry. Instead, she put Hu Chiuli off by saying she would think about it, secretly hoping that Yanyan might at least take the opportunity to return to the city to visit their parents when the time came. Hu Chiuli kept pushing Cece, unable to understand why she hesitated to escape her miserable marriage and return to the city. Cece made up an excuse, saying she needed to discuss things with her family first. Hu Chiuli sighed, complaining about how uninhabitable the remote mountain village was, while Cece simply nodded along. Suddenly, the rich aroma of stewed chicken and mushrooms drifted in from the kitchen. Surprised, Hu Chiuli realized Cece's family was cooking meat for lunch. She grew worried, warning Cece that cooking meat without her husband's permission might get her beaten. A few days prior, Hu Chiuli's own husband had beaten her just for eating an egg. Cece chuckled softly and explained that I had recently hunted some game, so she was secretly cooking a portion. When Yanyan brought out the meal, Hu Chiuli stared in disbelief at two large bowls piled high with wild pheasant, stewed with mushrooms and savory venison, accompanied by bowls of pure white rice. Noticing the new winter coats Cece and Yanyan were wearing, Hu Chiuli assumed they had sold part of the deer to buy the fabric, which Cece warmly confirmed. Starving and overcome with emotion, Hu Chiuli devoured the meat and rice like a ravenous ghost, tearing up as she tasted soy sauce for the first time in 3 years. She confessed that it was her first time eating a satisfying meal of meat since coming to the countryside. Looking at the few remaining pieces in the bowl, she embarrassedly asked if she could pack them to take home, and Cece readily agreed. Full and satisfied, Hu Chiuli cautioned Cece not to let temporary improvements blind her judgment. She argued that hunting was purely a matter of luck, warning that if my future hunts yielded nothing, our lives would quickly plunge back into poverty. Yanyan spoke up to defend me, proudly declaring that I was an incredible hunter who brought back huge catches every single time. Cece quickly cut Yanyan off with a stern look, determined to keep our massive savings of over 1,000 yuan a secret to avoid unnecessary trouble. Back at home, Hu Chiuli continued to urge my wife, Cece, to leave the countryside, reminding her that returning to the city would allow her research worker father and government-employed mother to find her a decent job. Cece gently assured her classmate that she would consider it. After Hu Chiuli left, Yanyan angrily called her selfish for abandoning her husband and child. But Cece made it clear that while she was staying, Yanyan definitely needed to return to the city eventually for her own future and their parents' sake. Meanwhile, deep in the mountains, a 7-man hunting party was inspecting a wire snare set in a thicket. Seeing blood and torn flesh, the hunter Mo Weiguo cursed as he realized a large wild boar had escaped the trap. Joining the hunt were my former enemies, Song Dahu and Song Erhu. Ever since I smashed their shotguns, the brothers had gone to stay with their uncle Mo Weiguo in Mo family village, joining his well-equipped hunting team. Following the fresh blood trail, the group hurried after the injured animal. At the same time, I was resting under a tree when Little Yellow flew down, calling out to inform me that it had found an injured wild boar on the other side of the mountain. Patted its head and rewarded it with minced meat. I set off after Little Yellow, eager to snag a prime catch that could earn me a few hundred yuan alongside the sable I had already taken. However, as I reached the ridge, gunshots echoed from the valley below. Crouching down, I watched through the trees 200 meters away as the wild boar collapsed, surrounded by 7 or 8 armed men. Recognizing the hunters from Mo family village, I spotted Song Dahu and Song Erhu right among them. Down at the foot of the slope, Mo Weiguo praised the massive 240-pound catch and promised his team a festive dinner and a profitable trip to town tomorrow. As Song Dahu flattered his uncle, he gritted his teeth and pleaded with Mo Weiguo to help him and Erhu seek revenge against me, nursing a deep, unwavering hatred in his heart. Lying on the snowy slope 200 meters away, I listened as Mo Weiguo promised to help Song Dahu and Song Erhu get revenge on me. They openly discussed finding me in the mountains to beat me, break my legs, leave me in a wheelchair, and take my wife Cici and sister-in-law Yanyan for themselves. Hearing their vile plan, my blood boiled with rage. Combining this with their previous attempt to rob my deer, their mother bad-mouthingly lying about me, and Dahu sabotaging the village rescue party, my heart hardened with deadly intent. I knew that if I didn't eliminate this threat, my family and I would eventually suffer at their hands. Once Mo Weiguo's hunting party carried the wild boar away, I instructed Little Yellow to tail them from a safe distance. I followed discreetly until they reached Mo family village, where the group was too large and armed for me to strike immediately. I returned home early before dark so Cici wouldn't worry. I showed Cici and Yanyan the high-value sable I had taken, expertly skinned it, and quickly ate dinner before retiring to my side room to wait for nightfall. Meanwhile, in Mo family village, Mo Weiguo threw a feast with pork offal stew and plenty of liquor. By the time the party ended, Song Dahu and Song Erhu were heavily intoxicated. Around nightfall, the two brothers staggered back towards Song family village along the quiet, dark path connecting the two villages. Drunk and stumbling, they vomited on the roadside while Erhu slurred disgusting comments about wanting to take Cici and Yanyan. As they limped along the desolate road, I silently crept out from the shadows behind them, ready to settle the score once and for all. Creeping up silently behind Song Dahu and Song Erhu, I delivered 2 swift kicks that sent both drunkards flying face first into the dirt. Before they could register what was happening, I stomped on Song Dahu's legs, shattering his calf bones with loud, crushing cracks. As he howled in agony, I immediately turned to Song Erhu and crushed both of his legs as well, causing severe comminuted fractures. The entire attack took less than 10 seconds. By the time they managed to turn over, I had already darted into the roadside woods, slipping back through my bedroom window, completely unnoticed. I burned my foot coverings in the hearth, listened to Cici's even breathing, and drifted off to sleep, feeling deeply satisfied with my swift revenge. The blood-curdling screams echoing near the village entrance eventually woke up the neighbors. A young man named Da Zhuang alerted Song Dahu's parents, Song Jiawu and Aunt Guihua. Rushing to the scene alongside 20 curious villagers, Aunt Guihua found her sons lying in the dirt, wallowing in pool of blood and urine before passing out from pain. When a kindly neighbor advised taking them to the town clinic rather than a barefoot doctor, Aunt Guihua spat back insults, driving the helpful villagers away. Left with no choice, Song Jiawu called on a few relatives to carry his sons toward the township health center. At the town clinic, the doctor informed the panicked parents that the fractures were far too severe, with crushed bones and torn flesh. Warning them that lower leg necrosis might force a double amputation, he urged them to transfer the brothers to the county hospital immediately. Aunt Guihua fainted on the spot. By morning, Song Dahu regained consciousness on a bumpy ox cart heading toward the county. His father pressed him about the attacker, but Dahu admitted he was too drunk to remember details, only recalling a dark figure vanishing into the trees. When Song Jiawu hesitantly revealed that the doctor recommended leg amputations, the shocking news sent Song Dahu straight into another dead faint. News that Song Dahu and Song Erhu had both legs broken spread rapidly through Song family village, with many secretly celebrating their misfortune. Knowing I had acted cleanly in the dark without leaving evidence or witnesses, I remained unbothered. After breakfast, I took the sable pelt to the Qingjiang Town Supply and Marketing Cooperative. Director Wu Junhua was stunned by the flawless high-quality fur and offered me 400 yuan. I readily accepted, pushing my total savings past 1,800 yuan. I then asked Wu Junhua if he could help me source an industrial coupon to buy a bicycle. He explained that coupons were strictly regulated, but suggested I try my luck at the local black market, operating on Saturday nights, or check the county black market. Returning home in the afternoon, I found Cici sewing shoes. I sat down with her to consult on buying a bicycle for around 150 yuan to make traveling to town easier. Cici readily agreed, explaining that since I earned the money, she supported any decision that wasn't wasteful. Her warm support and traditional trust in me brought a smile to my face. Cici then brought up an important matter. She revealed that her classmate Hu Chiuli had visited yesterday and shared news that educated youth might soon be allowed to return to the city. Looking at me nervously, Cici asked if I would object if her sister Yan Yan returned to the city when the policy took effect. I smiled and reassured her that I fully supported Yan Yan going back to enjoy a better life in the city. Cici was secretly delighted by my open-minded response. Sensing my unspoken anxiety, I hesitantly asked about her own plans. Cici chuckled gently at my nervous expression and confessed that since she was married to me, she would stay by my side wherever I went and would only ever return to the city to visit her parents. Hearing her sweet confession, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I reassured Cici that when the policy allowed educated youth to return to the city, I would accompany her to visit my in-laws. I resolved to treat her parents with utmost care and respect, just as my father-in-law had once treated me well. Since I was determined to buy a bicycle as soon as possible, I offered to cook dinner early so I could head to the town's black market that very night. Down in the kitchen, I prepared a delicious soy sauce, wild pheasant, and stewed sable meat with rich spices. Out in the village, neighbors caught the mouth-watering aroma of our meal and sighed with envy. One woman even regretted stopping her husband from joining the search party for me days ago, realizing her mistake had cost them a chance at free meat and fortune. At home, Yanyan devoured her dinner with delight, praising my cooking skills over her sisters. I happily promised to cook for them often. After handing Cici a chicken leg and taking her gentle warning to stay safe to heart, I grabbed my new flashlight and set off into the dark toward town. An hour later, I reached a quiet alley at the end of town where the local black market was operating. Dozens of people were browsing stalls, trading food stamps, cloth coupons, and household items. I searched carefully for industrial coupons to buy the bicycle, but found none. As Director Wu had warned, industrial coupons were far too rare in a small-town black market, meaning I would likely have to try the county black market in a few days. As I wandered through the stalls, a display of face cream in front of a young vendor caught my eye. Seeing 6 boxes of high-end Yashuang brand snow cream, I recognized it as a luxury item popular among city women. Though the vendor initially demanded 1.5 yuan per box, I haggled aggressively, offering to buy all 6 boxes at once. Realizing rural buyers rarely spent money on luxury cosmetics, and that his stock had been sitting for half a month, the vendor gritted his teeth and finally agreed to my price of 1.3 yuan per box. I happily bought the whole lot, eager to bring this wonderful gift home to Cici. After paying 7 yuan and 80 cents for the 6 boxes of Yashuang snow cream, I continued browsing the black market. Half an hour later, I spotted a tall, masked vendor selling an engineer's industrial coupon. I verified its authenticity and paid his asking price of 45 yuan. Knowing I had shown too much cash, I quickly ducked into a dark alley, vaulted over a wall, and easily shook off 3 men who tried to tail me. By 11 that night, I arrived back at Song Family Village to find the living room light still on. Cici was waiting up for me, relieved to see me safe. I showed her the industrial coupon and brought out the 6 boxes of high-end snow cream. Surprised and deeply touched by her very first gift from me, Cece blushed sweet and thanked me, confessing before bed that she truly loved the face cream. The next morning, I woke up to Cece and Yan Yan happily chatting as they applied the fragrant cream. Yan Yan ran over and gave me an excited hug to thank me, earning a playful scold from Cece for acting so childishly. After breakfast, I headed to the Qingjiang Town Supply and Marketing Cooperative. Director Wu was shocked to see that I had actually secured an industrial coupon so quickly. I paid 150 yuan for a brand new Phoenix brand bicycle. Riding the shiny bike through town, every single head turned to watch me pass. 20 minutes later, as I rode towards Song Family Village, the villagers working in the fields stared in absolute disbelief. News spread like wildfire that a former gambling addict had bought the second bicycle in the entire village. Pushing the bike into our courtyard, Cece and Yanyan ran out with bright, overjoyed smiles, eager to take a ride. Cece laughed softly and encouraged Yanyan to take the new bicycle out for a spin. Both sisters were tall enough to ride the Phoenix bicycle effortlessly. As they happily rode around the village entrance, the locals watched in envy, gossiping about how my family was eating meat every day and thriving. Desperate to borrow money for her son's double leg amputations, Aunt Guihua returned to the village. Seeing Cece and Yanyan riding a brand new bicycle filled her heart with toxic jealousy and hatred. She couldn't stand seeing my family prosper while her own sons were crippled and facing total ruin. She spat in disgust and cursed us as she hurried home. By the next morning, the weather in northeast China began to warm up as March 1979 arrived. Noticing the melting snow, I decided to pause hunting deep in the mountains to avoid dangerous avalanches and prevent my wife from worrying. Instead, I stayed close to home, training little Yahello in the nearby woods. Meanwhile, at the county hospital, Song Dahu and Song Erhu woke up to the devastating reality that both of their lower legs had been amputated. Overwhelmed by fear, Erhu wept, terrified he would never marry, while Dahu worried his wife would abandon him. Aunt Guihua sobbed hysterically until her brother, Mo Weiguo, urged them to focus on finding the culprit so they could demand massive financial compensation. When asked who they had offended, the family realized their list of enemies was endless. They had fought with half the village and robbed multiple hunters over the years. Driven by greed and spite, Aunt Guihua suddenly suggested framing me. Having seen my family buy a bicycle, she knew I had substantial savings they could extort. Clinging to the idea, Song Dahu immediately agreed, falsely claiming I was the one who had attacked them out of revenge for the stolen deer. Lying on their hospital beds, Song Dahu and Song Erhu convinced themselves that I was the one who had broken their legs, arguing that only my rare strength could smash bones so completely. Driven by greed for my family's savings, Aunt Guihua immediately reported me to the police, hoping to extort over 1,000 yuan in compensation. Right after lunch, a commotion broke out at my gate. I opened the door to find 4 uniformed police officers accompanied by Aunt Guihua and the rest of her family, with Dahu and Erhu lying on stretchers, glaring at me with burning hatred. The lead officer, Officer Zhou, asked to step inside. In the living room, Cece and Yanyan looked terrified. Erhu pointed a finger at me, shouting that I had ambushed them while they were drunk. I immediately feigned outrage, demanding evidence and accusing them of framing me. Officer Zhou silenced the room and questioned my whereabouts between 10 and 11 o'clock that night. I calmly explained that I was asleep at home, and Cece quickly chimed in to confirm my alibi. When Officer Zhou asked about our previous conflict at the foot of the mountain, I admitted to fighting them over a deer they tried to rob from me, but firmly denied smashing their guns. Since the recent thaw had erased all tracks, and there were no eyewitnesses, both sides were simply sticking to their own stories. Aunt Guihua panicked when Officer Zhou prepared to leave without arresting me, but he sternly explained that investigations required solid evidence. Before leaving, he instructed me to stay in the village for further questioning. As they walked away, Officer Zhou questioned Dahu about his movements on the night of the attack. Dahu admitted that, after hunting, they had gone straight to Mo family village to drink, only returning late at night. Hearing this, Officer Joe privately deduced that since the villagers of Song Family Village had no way of knowing Dahu's whereabouts that night, an ambush by me was unlikely. Instead, he suspected the real culprit was far more likely to be someone from Mo Family Village who knew the brothers were drinking there. After leaving my house, Officer Joe and his officers dismissed Song Dahu's frantic demands for my immediate arrest. Instead, they began a thorough door-to-door investigation throughout Song Family Village to gather information about the brothers and their standing in the community. First, they stopped by Uncle Fugi's house. Uncle Fugi explained that he had been awake until late that night making sauce, but had seen or heard nothing unusual until the screams broke out, adding that no neighbors would willingly wander outside in the freezing cold. As Officer Joe questioned other villagers, a clear picture of the Song Dahu family emerged. The villagers eagerly pointed out that the brothers and their father were notorious village bullies who made enemies everywhere. They routinely robbed hunters from neighboring villages of their game and relied on their uncle's heavily armed hunting team to intimidate others. One woman highlighted how Dahu's mother had a foul mouth and quarreled with almost every woman in the village, proving that Countess people had strong motives to seek revenge against them. Officer Zhou's team analyzed these findings closely. They noted that Dahu had previously stolen prey from a young orphan in Mo Family Village, making that young man the prime suspect since the brothers were drinking in Mo Family Village on the night of the attack. Furthermore, the villagers recalled that when the brothers were first found, they admitted they were too drunk to see who had beaten them. The officers realized the brothers' sudden insistence on naming me as the attacker made no logical sense. Connecting the dots, the officers realized why Dahu was so determined to accuse me. I had recently bought a brand new bicycle, hosted a large feast for the village, and become known as a wealthy 1,000 yuan household. The police concluded that the Dahu family was targeting me out of greed, hoping to frame the richest man in the village to extort heavy compensation. Finally, the officers visited Dahu's house to inspect the 2 crushed shotguns Dahu claimed I had crushed with my bare feet. Looking at the mangled steel barrels, Officer Joe dismissed the claim as a ridiculous lie, suspecting the family had smashed the guns themselves, with tools to fabricate evidence against me. Aunt Guihua tried to convince Officer Joe to arrest me on the spot, hoping to make my family go bankrupt and extort thousands of yuan for her son's medical bills and Erhu's future wedding. However, Officer Joe coldly dismissed her demands, explaining that my family was just one of many suspects due to how many enemies her sons had made. He told them to wait patiently for updates and led his team away, disgusted by their behavior. As they walked out of the village, Officer Joe's team acknowledged that without solid physical evidence, the attack would likely remain an unsolved cold case. Back at home, Cece expressed worry over the false accusation, but I reassured her that the police had sharp eyes and wouldn't arrest an innocent man. Yanyan warmly defended me as well, and I awkwardly chuckled, admitting that, while I used to be a terrible person, I was truly changing. A week passed quietly. The snow melted rapidly, and the police never returned to question me. Meanwhile, Song Dahu's house was filled with constant screaming and misery. When Song Jiawu returned from the police station, with news that their case was put on hold behind other investigations, Aunt Guihua flew into a rage, twisting his ear and cursing him as a spineless coward. Neighbors passing by overheard the screaming and scoffed, feeling that the wicked brothers were simply receiving divine retribution. The next morning, the weather cleared completely. With a week of snow melting behind us, the severe avalanche danger in the mountains had passed, exposing wild grass that would surely attract hungry game. I told Cece at breakfast that I was heading out to hunt, promising faithfully that I would return home before dark and never spend another night outdoors. Seeing my determination, Cece packed dry rations for me while I went next door to invite Uncle Fugi and Yukai. Aunt Fugi only agreed once I reassured her we would not stay overnight. Eager to earn money to rebuild his house, Uncle Fugi enthusiastically grabbed his gear. Packing my oxhorn bow, hunting knife, water bladder, and little Yahello, I set off into the mountains with Uncle Fugi and Yukai, ready to capitalize on the prime hunting season. As Uncle Fugui, Yukai and I ventured deeper into the mountains, the snow had thinned considerably, revealing green patches where birds chirped lively. Uncle Fugi suggested setting wire snares and animal traps, but I told him there was no rush. Suddenly, Little Yellow cried out from the sky and flew toward a nearby thicket. Understanding its bird language, I knew it had spotted 2 wild rabbits. I sprinted ahead, drew my oxhorn bow, and smoothly knocked 2 arrows at once. With a double shot from 130 meters away, I brought down 2 fat rabbits. We kept pushing forward, letting Little Yellow scout ahead whenever it rested. By noon, I had also successfully hunted a roe deer and a wild pheasant. While we sat down to eat our dry rations, Little Yellow returned in a frantic hurry, screeching excitedly. Uncle Fugi and Yukai were bewildered, but I immediately understood Little Yellow's message. A massive herd of wild boars was foraging just ahead. Putting away our half-eaten food, we followed Little Yellow for about 3 kilometers until we reached the rim of a narrow, dead-end canyon. The canyon stretched about 1 kilometer long and 50 meters wide, surrounded by 100-meter steep slopes on 3 sides, leaving only a single low-sloped entrance that acted like a natural pocket trap. Looking down into the lush green canyon floor, Yukai gasped in amazement. Over 30 wild boars were leisurely grazing on weeds and wild vegetables. Among them was a massive wild boar king weighing well over 300 pounds. Yukai excitedly declared that Little Yellow had made us rich, but Uncle Fugui and I quickly cautioned him to stay calm. A herd of over 30 wild boars, especially one led by a wild boar king, could easily stampede in a single direction, making a head-on confrontation extremely dangerous if not planned carefully. I recognized that the narrow, dead-end canyon formed a natural pocket trap that gave us a massive terrain advantage. I proposed a plan. Uncle Fugi and Yukai would set their 5 wild boar snares and 5 animal traps across the 20-meter-wide canyon entrance. After that, I would guard the entrance alone while they went to the far, enclosed end of the canyon and fired their shotguns down at the herd, scaring the wild boars into fleeing toward the only exit. Though Uncle Fugui and Yukai worried that a stampeding herd of wild boars would steamroll over me, I reassured them that I would climb a tall tree by the entrance to stay safe and unleash my heavy oxhorn bow from above. They agreed, and we quietly moved to the canyon entrance to lay down all 10 traps. Once everything was set, I climbed 10 meters up a sturdy tree, while Uncle Fugi and Yukai carefully descended the steep slope at the far end of the canyon. Positioned safely above the canyon floor, Uncle Fugi and Yukai opened fire with their shotguns. The sudden, terrifying blasts echoed through the canyon, injuring 1 boar and sending the rest of the 30-plus boars into a complete frenzy. Led by the massive 300-pound wild boar king, the terrified herd sprinted straight toward the entrance. Hiding high in my tree, I drew my oxhorn bow to full draw and tracked the approaching herd. As the wild boar king reached 200 meters, I released my first iron-backed arrow. The arrow struck the wild boar king squarely in the left eye, sending its heavy body crashing sideways into the dirt. Despite losing their leader, the deafening gunfire behind forced the boars to keep charging forward, rapidly drawing and firing an arrow every 3 seconds. I downed 7 or 8 boars in under 25 seconds. As the panicked lead boars finally reached the entrance, the first wild boar stepped directly into a concealed steel trap, triggering the sharp steel jaws to clamp down hard on its front leg. Panicked by the deafening gunfire behind them, the charging wild boars slammed straight into our concealed traps. Sharp steel teeth clamped deep into their legs, while wire snares locked tightly around others, leaving them screaming and pinned in place. From my high vantage point in the tree, I unleashed my heavy oxhorn bow at 20 meters, striking every untrapped boar with lethal precision. Though 7 or 8 boars managed to break past the entrance and flee into the dense forest, my arrows and traps created a massive pile of carcasses at the canyon mouth. Hearing gunfire continue inside the canyon, as boars turned back, I leaped down from the tree and sprinted inside. Down below, a crazed, 240-pound male boar with sharp tusks was charging straight at Song Yukai. Yukai fired his shotgun at 30 meters, but missed due to pure nervousness. With the enraged beast just 10 meters away and charging, I drew my bow and shot an iron-backed arrow squarely through its right leg from over 100 meters out. The boar lost its balance and crashed to the dirt right at Yukai's feet, allowing him to quickly fire a fatal point-blank shot. Using the long range of my oxhorn bow, I picked off the remaining boars cornered in the narrow canyon. Once the battle ended, we gathered all the carcasses at the entrance and counted a staggering 30 wild boars. I personally shot most of them, while Uncle Fugui killed 3, and Yukai took 2. Thrilled by our incredible fortune, I offered to split the heavy catch 50-50. However, Uncle Fugui firmly refused, insisting that little Yahello had found the herd and that I had done almost all the heavy lifting and saved Yukai's life. He insisted that taking just 10 boars was more than fair. Touched by his honesty, I accepted his decision. With 30 heavy wild boars averaging over 200 pounds each, transporting them back alone was impossible. Assessing the sun at around 1 in the afternoon, I instructed Yukai to sprint back to the village and gather the men who had previously joined the mountain search party. I promised to treat everyone to a massive feast of slaughtered pig stew and drinks tonight, in exchange for helping us carry our massive fortune out of the woods. By around 3 in the afternoon, Song Yukai ran back to Song family village, soaked in sweat. He broke the shocking news to his mother and Cici that we had hunted 30 wild boars. Gathering a dozen strong young men with ropes and shoulder poles, Yukai led them back up the mountain. News of our record-breaking hunt spread like wildfire, filling the entire village with envy and amazement. Even Grandpa Song joined the party to witness the miracle for himself. Standing before the mountain of game and the massive wild boar king, he marveled that no one in the region had ever brought down 30 boars at once. I warmly invited everyone who came to help, along with their families, to join us for a huge feast of slaughtered pig stew and drinks tonight. Meanwhile, over at Song Dahu's house, Dahu lay in bed consumed by bitter jealousy and despair over his lost legs and failing marriage. Cici and Yan rushed to the village entrance when the parade of boars arrived. Checking me over with deep concern, Cici asked if I was hurt. I teased her softly, promising I wouldn't leave her a widow, which made her blush beet red. Back at our courtyard and Uncle Fugui's house, a team of villagers helped us boil water, butcher the carcasses, and clean the offal until 9 at night. Half the village gathered to feast on pork and liquor, filling the night air with mouth-watering aromas. Those who were excluded could only listen from afar, envious and resentful. Before dawn the next morning, I organized over 20 young men to haul all 30 slaughtered wild boars toward the Qingjiang Town Supply and Marketing Cooperative using carts and poles. Early rising farmers from neighboring villages and town residents were completely stunned by the massive convoy. I walked into the Supply and Marketing Cooperative first and greeted Director Wu Junhua, teasingly asking if his branch could handle the massive load of meat I brought. Wu Junhua stepped outside, expecting a modest catch, but froze in speechlessness as he stared at the 30 slaughtered wild boars lining the street. Director Wu Junhua from the Town Supply and Marketing Cooperative was stunned to see 30 wild boars. Since the small town could not absorb so much meat at once, he arranged to ship a batch to the county branch. After weighing everything, my 20 wild boars yielded over 3,700 jin, earning me 4,450 yuan. Uncle Fugi's 10 wild boars brought in 2,160 yuan, making his family official 1,000 yuan earners. Overjoyed, I gave each of the 20 village helpers 1 yuan as a reward, winning their lasting respect. Returning home around noon, I enjoyed a hot meal cooked by Cici, whose bright smile had finally returned. After eating, I handed 4,000 yuan over to her, keeping a few hundred for daily expenses. She accepted the thick stack of cash with soft gratitude, deeply moved by how hard I was working and my complete abandonment of gambling. I suggested taking her to town in a few days to buy new bedding and women's necessities, and she happily agreed. The next morning, I woke up late and faced another embarrassing moment when Cici took my laundry. She quickly snatched my changed pants to wash them at the courtyard well. As she scrubbed them, her face flushed red as she recognized the physical proof of my midnight dreams. Noticing her sister Yan watching her, Cici composed herself and firmly instructed Yan to sleep in the side room starting tonight, as she had private matters to discuss with me. Yanyan playfully agreed without prying further. That evening, I decided to cook a feast of spicy dry pot rabbit and potato-stewed roe deer meat. As mouth-watering aromas filled the kitchen, Yanyan ran inside excitedly to smell the food, while I looked forward to a cozy, warm night with my family. I prepared a delicious dinner for my family, featuring spicy dry pot, wild rabbit, and potato-stewed roe deer meat. I set up a small stove for the rabbit dish, so it stayed piping hot throughout the meal. Yanyan devoured the crispy, spicy meat with rice, enthusiastically asking me to hunt more wild rabbits so she could eat dry pot rabbit every day. Cece also praised the meal and softly encouraged me to take good care of my own health, which filled my heart with happiness. My wife was clearly warming up to me at last. After dinner and a stroll to Uncle Fugui's house, Cece informed me that she had prepared bathwater for me. Once I cleaned up, she hesitantly invited me back to sleep in the master bedroom, sending Yanyan to the side room. Overjoyed by her gesture, I quickly changed the bedding while she bathed. When Cece turned off the lights and lay beside me, a nervous silence filled the dark room. After 10 minutes, I gently moved closer to her. In a hushed voice, C asked if I would ever beat her again. Deeply ashamed of my past abusive behavior, I vowed to treat her gently and never hurt her again. Cece quietly asked me to be gentle, but as I placed my hand on her shoulder, I felt her body trembling with instinctive fear rooted in past trauma. Realizing she was forcing herself and wasn't truly ready, I gently withdrew my hand and got out of bed to head back to the side room. Cece remained quiet until I reached the doorway, soft-spokenly asking me to give her a little more time. I nodded understandingly. As I turned to leave, she hesitantly added that I shouldn't use my hands so much because it was bad for my health. My face burned with embarrassment, but rather than making things more awkward with complicated explanations, I simply kept quiet and headed off to bed. After leaving the master bedroom, I slept in the second side room without waking my sister-in-law. Getting up the next morning, I felt encouraged. Even though we hadn't taken that final step, Cece inviting me back into her room proved she was gradually opening her heart to me again after past trauma. In the kitchen, Cece prepared noodles with minced meat sauce, looking away shyly as she served me. I slurped down my breakfast and suggested taking her to town to shop at the supply and marketing cooperative, since she hadn't visited in 6 months. Yanyan was disappointed. She couldn't ride along on our single bicycle, but perked up when I promised to bring her back snacks. Cece playfully scolded her sister for wasting money, but seeing how well I treated, Yanyan warmed her heart, making her marvel at how far our lives had improved. Cece hopped on the back of my Phoenix bicycle, and as we reached a deserted country road, she gently wrapped her arms around my waist. Over half an hour later, we arrived at the town's supply and marketing cooperative. Director Wu Junhua greeted us warmly, praising my luck and admiring my beautiful, intellectual wife. I urged Cece to pick out whatever she wanted without worrying about prices. Mindful of saving money, Cece picked out necessities like toothpaste and rough toilet paper. But I stepped in to buy 3 tubes of toothpaste and softer, higher-quality toilet paper instead. I also stocked up on snacks for Yanyan, including sunflower seeds, salted peanuts, animal crackers, and over a dozen packs of rare white rabbit milk candy. As we browsed near the checkout counter, 2 Seagull brand watches caught Cece's eye. The female clerk enthusiastically explained that the store had just received a new shipment featuring both a men's and women's model. Seeing the women's watch priced at 120 yuan, Cece quickly shook her head and pulled me away, insisting it was far too expensive, impractical for farm work, and required an industrial coupon we didn't have. At the town supply and marketing cooperative counter, the saleswoman originally scoffed when I remarked that 120 yuan wasn't expensive for a watch. However, her jaw dropped when a colleague informed her that I was the hunter who had recently earned over 4,000 yuan selling wild boars to Director Wu. While Cece was busy picking out household supplies, I pulled Director Wu into a back room. Knowing my wife liked the Seagull brand women's watch, I asked if he could help me source an industrial coupon. Director Wu happened to have an engineered Zhong voucher that he planned to sell anyway, so he offered it to me at the black market price of 30 yuan. I handed him 150 yuan total for the watch and coupon, asking him to wrap it secretly so I could surprise Cece later. When we returned home at noon, Yan eagerly helped unload the bags from the bicycle. Seeing the packs of White Rabbit milk candy, she burst into tears of nostalgic joy, having not tasted them since being sent to the countryside, before happily sharing pieces with Cece and me. Once inside, I pulled out the small box and presented Cece with her gift. She covered her mouth in absolute shock, recognizing the seagull watch from the store. Surprised and bewildered, she asked how I managed to acquire it without an industrial coupon. I reassured her that as long as she liked it, I would do whatever it took to get it for her, emphasizing that we could easily afford it and didn't need to worry about money anymore. I took her soft hand and gently fastened the watch onto her wrist. Cece admitted she loved it, though she worried about getting it dirty during daily farm work. Yan giggled with excitement, proudly pointing out that Cece was now the very first woman in the entire village to own a wristwatch. Not long after I went to the woods with little Yahello to continue hawk training, Cece's classmate Hu Chiuli arrived for a visit. Catching the lingering scent of meat from lunch, Hu Chiuli pressed Cece once again on whether she planned to return to the city. Cece firmly replied that, while Yan would go back, she intended to stay in the countryside with me for the rest of her life. Hu Chiuli could not comprehend Cece's decision until she suddenly noticed the brand-new seagull wristwatch on Cece's wrist. Yan proudly announced that I had bought it for Cece for 120 yuan. Green with envy, Hu Chiuli found it hard to believe that a former gambler was now buying expensive luxury gifts for his wife. Acknowledging our recent earnings from hunting 30 wild boars, Hu Chiuli quickly warned Cece not to be blinded by temporary kindness. She argued that gamblers never truly change, predicting that I would eventually squander everything and drag Cece back into misery. She urged Cece to demand money from me immediately and secret it away as a backup plan. Hu Chiuli went on to explain the strict official requirements for educated youth returning to the city. She noted that hardship exemptions, health discharges, and job replacements were out of reach for them, leaving marriage or bribery as the only options. She claimed that for Yan to secure a city job without getting married, we would need to spend a massive amount of money to buy connections. Yan angrily retorted that I had completely turned my life around, and that she would rather stay in the countryside than listen to her badmouth me. Reminding Yan that I had almost sold her in the past, Hu Chiuli insisted she was only offering honest advice for their own good. Secretly, Hu Chiuli hoped Cece would extort a large sum from me, so she could eventually ask Cece for financial help with her own return to the city. Yan snapped back at Hu Chiuli, proudly declaring that I had completely turned my life around and handed over all my hunting earnings for Cece to manage. Hu Chiuli was stunned to learn Cece controlled thousands of yuan. Seeing Yan reveal our private family business, Cece scolded her, while Yan quietly regretted her slip of the tongue, realizing Hu Chiuli might harbor bad intentions. Exploiting the news, Hu Chiuli put on a tearful performance. She lamented how hard life in the countryside was for her and complained that she lacked the money needed to bribe officials for a city job. Once educated youth were allowed to return. Looking at Cece pitifully, she asked to borrow 300 yuan. Cece frowned at the massive request, which equaled nearly a full year's wages for a city worker. She firmly refused, stating she couldn't make such a decision. Hu Chiuli refused to give up, pleading with Cece to lend the money in secret behind my back, promising to pay it back once she secured a city job. Her desperate begging left Cece deeply conflicted, but memories of past hardship quickly cleared her mind. Cece recalled how she had once begged Hu Chiuli for a handful of food when Yan was starving, only to be turned away empty-handed. More importantly, Cece knew that every single yuan we had was earned by me risking my life freezing in the mountains to hunt game. She realized that secretly giving away my hard-earned money to an outsider would be a betrayal of her conscience. Holding firm, Cece told Hu Chiuli that she was merely holding the money for me and could not lend out such a huge sum. Yan chimed in, telling Hu Chiuli that if she wanted to borrow money, she would have to ask me directly, knowing full well I would never lend a single cent to a woman who constantly badmouthed me. Hu continued putting on a pitiful act, begging Cece to lend her 300 yuan for the sake of their long friendship. Seeing her pressuring Cece, Yan stepped in and told Hu not to make things difficult. Realizing she wasn't going to get a single cent, Hu stormed off in anger. The moment she left, her face darkened with bitter resentment. She was deeply jealous of Cece's luxurious life and brand new wristwatch, swearing to find another way to force Cece to return to the city so she could get her hands on the money. Yan praised Cece for holding her ground, calling Hu a selfish woman who wanted to abandon her family. In the evening, I returned home with little Yahello and a 3-pound wild pheasant I shot in the woods. I promised to make spicy chicken for dinner, and an excited Yan happily offered to help me tend the kitchen fire. Along with pickled cabbage tofu fish stew, made from the ingredients I bought in town, dinner was served hot and fragrant. Cece laughed softly when I joked that we were tired of eating meat every day, teasing that villagers would beat me up if they heard that. When Yan marveled at my cooking skills, I made up a story about learning regional recipes from a chef while drinking. During dinner, Cece looked up and confessed that Hu had visited to borrow 300 yuan for city return bribes. Cece explained that she firmly refused because every yuan was earned by me, risking my life in the mountains, and she was merely keeping the family funds safe. Hearing her gentle words filled my heart with warmth. Yan angrily added that Hu was a terrible person who constantly badmouthed me and tried to persuade Cece to divorce me and abandon our home. Learning that Cece remained completely unmoved by Hu manipulation and chose to be completely honest with me, I felt a deep sense of relief and pride. This wonderful wife of mine was truly worth loving and pampering for the rest of my life. I told my wife and Yan that we couldn't stop people like Hu from talking, so we should just focus on living our own lives. Looking around our dilapidated, decades-old mud brick house, built by my grandfather, I brought up an exciting new project. Now that we had plenty of food and clothes, it was time to upgrade our home. I proposed building a brand new house on the spacious vegetable garden plot next door so we wouldn't have to move out during construction. I explained the options to Cece. While an ordinary mud brick home cost around 70 to 150 yuan, and basic brick houses ran between 300 and 600 yuan, I aimed much higher. I estimated our custom build would cost around 1,000 yuan. I planned for a large, comfortable house with 4 or 5 spacious rooms, a modernized kitchen, brick walls plastered in clean cement, and fully cemented floors and courtyard. Cece warmly supported the idea, knowing we had thousands in savings. I also shared my plans to build indoor toilets and construct a cozy private bathroom directly connected to our master bedroom, allowing the hearth's heat to keep her warm during winter baths. Cece was deeply touched by my thoughtful consideration for her southern bathing habits and wondered where I learned so much about building. I quickly made up an excuse about hearing stories from old bricklayers, and she happily agreed to let me handle everything. Meanwhile, late that night, Hu secretly got out of bed to write a letter home by moonlight. After explaining to her parents that she couldn't borrow money yet, she wrote a detailed, exaggerated account of Cece's past, framing me as an abusive drunken gambler who had tried to sell Yan to settle debts. Knowing her parents were big gossips, Hu calculated that the horrifying news would quickly reach my in-laws. She believed Cece's parents would panic and force both daughters to return to the city, giving her another chance to manipulate Cece and get her hands on our money. The morning after discussing the new house, I told Cece I was heading out to hire bricklayers so we could start building as soon as possible. Cece fully supported moving into a modern home sooner. I rode my Phoenix bicycle to Yangjiatun to meet Yang Jinrong, the most famous bricklayer foreman in the area who had previously built the village chief's house. I laid out my ambitious plan, a 300-square-meter brick home featuring a modern kitchen, 4 rooms, a spacious courtyard, smooth cement floors, and interior walls plastered with cement and coated in white lime putty. I also handed him a detailed blueprint I had drawn, which included glass windows with metal frames and 2 indoor flush toilets, one for public use and one inside our master bedroom. Yang Jinrong gasped at the sheer luxury of the design, warning me that city-style cement and lime putty finishes were extremely costly. I waved off his concerns, reassuring him that money was no object. He roughly estimated the total cost for materials and labor at 1,200 yuan, declaring it would be the grandest, most luxurious home built in the entire surrounding area. When he realized I was the famous hunter who had brought down 30 wild boars, he beamed with admiration and eagerly agreed to manage the sourcing and transport of materials in exchange for a generous tip. After leaving Yang Jinrong's house, I visited a well-known local feng shui master. I gave him a 1 yuan red envelope and he calculated that the most auspicious date to break ground would be in exactly half a month. When I returned home that evening, Cici was pleasantly surprised by how fast everything was moving. The next day, I accompanied Yang Jinrong to the county town to inspect material prices for red bricks, cement, timber, and glass, ensuring I wouldn't be overcharged. Over the following week, heavy shipments of red bricks, timber, and cement began arriving at our plot, one after another, as we prepared to build our dream home. In the capital city, Hu Qiuli's parents, Hu Jian and Zhang Guijing, opened a letter from their daughter, complaining about how difficult and expensive it would be for educated youth to return to the city. As they read through her letter, they noticed a section detailing the tragic life of their neighbor Liu Guocai's daughters, Cici and Yan Yan. The letter painted a horrifying picture, claiming that Cici's husband was a violent gambling addict who beat her constantly when drunk or losing money. Even worse, it stated that he was planning to sell Yan Yan to settle his gambling debts. Shocked and heartbroken for the girls, Hu Jian and his wife realized Cici had been hiding her suffering from her parents to spare them worry. Feeling a duty to help their neighbors, they immediately rushed over to Liu Guocai's house. At that moment, my in-laws, Liu Guocai and Huang Qifen, were quietly discussing potential matchmakers for Yan Yan and hoping Cici might eventually divorce her rural husband to remarry in the city. When Hu Jian and Zhang Guijing arrived and handed them the letter, my mother-in-law read the shocking details and nearly fainted from grief. After reviving her with water, my mother-in-law wept hysterically, crushed to learn her daughters were supposedly living a life worse than animals at the hands of a scumbag husband. My father-in-law stood frozen, his hands trembling violently as he clutched the letter. He felt deeply tormented, realizing for the first time that Cici's reassuring letters home had been a brave front to hide unimaginable pain and domestic abuse. My mother-in-law wept bitterly, tormented by the thought of her daughter's suffering in the countryside. Driven by fierce protective anger, she urged my father-in-law, Liu Guocai, to take immediate leave from work and travel to Song family village to confront me. She insisted he take along their 30-year-old nephew, Liu Shenglong, an intimidating ex-soldier and skilled fighter, to give me a severe beating and protect the girls. Determined to save his daughters, Liu Guocai agreed without hesitation. After promising Hu Jian he would also visit Hu Qiuli on their trip, Liu Guocai and his wife went straight to Liu Shenglong's home. Hearing that his beloved younger cousins were being abused and that Yan Yan was almost sold off to settle gambling debts, Shenglong flew into a rage and immediately agreed to go. Though his mother worried about him taking time off work, Shenglong refused any financial reward, insisting it was his duty as a cousin to stand up for the girls. The next morning, Liu Guocai and Shenglong requested leave and boarded a train at noon, traveling all the way from the capital to Black City. From there, they took a long bus ride to the local county town, arriving late in the evening. Unable to travel further at night, they checked into a lodging and set out for Song family village early the next morning by hired tractor. Riding along the bumpy, outdated roads, Liu Guocai could barely contain his anxiety and grief, having been unable to sleep for 2 straight nights. He vowed that no matter the cost, he would bring Cici and Yan Yan back to the city, even if it meant giving up his wife's factory job for Cici to inherit. Around noon, the tractor dropped them off at the entrance of Song family village. Carrying their bags, they walked into the village and asked locals for directions to my house. As they approached my courtyard, Liu Guocai grew increasingly terrified that Yan Yan might have already been sold off, or that Cici had been tortured beyond recognition. Gritting his teeth, he instructed Shenglong that if the girls were in terrible shape, Shenglong should hold nothing back and beat me to a pulp. Shenglong nodded grimly, fully prepared to teach me a brutal lesson. While my family was enjoying lunch, a familiar voice suddenly called out from outside the courtyard, announcing that Cece's father had arrived. Yanyan froze in disbelief, holding a roasted chicken leg, while Cece gasped, recognizing both her father and cousin's voices. Surprised by their unannounced arrival, I followed them to the gate. Cece opened the door and burst into tears of joy, throwing her arms around her father, Liu Guocai, and her cousin, Liu Shenglong. Standing behind them, I greeted my father-in-law with deep guilt, remembering how I had ruined his life in my past existence. The moment Liu Guocai saw me, his face contorted with rage. He accused me of abusing his daughters and trying to sell Yanyan, ordering Shenglong to beat me up. As Shenglong rolled up his sleeves to break my legs, Cece stepped between us, pleading with her father to calm down and listen. Confused by Cece defending me, Liu Guocai assumed I was threatening her behind closed doors. Cece firmly explained that I treated her wonderfully and that past issues were resolved misunderstandings. Yanyan chimed in, pointing out their new clothes, our Phoenix bicycle, and our plans to build a new house. Liu Guocai dismissed Yanyan's claims of eating meat every day as lies, until Shenglong pointed to the brand new bicycle parked in the yard. Cece quickly invited her father and cousin inside to eat. Stepping into the room, Liu Guocai and Shenglong were frozen in shock by the sight on the table: roast chicken, pork stew, with glass noodles, and another rich meat dish. Staring at 3 separate meat dishes, served for a casual weekday lunch, Liu Guocai realized we couldn't have staged this, since they had arrived without warning. Craving the feast, Shenglong swallowed hard, while Cece happily set out extra bowls and chopsticks for them. Staring at the feast of roast chicken, pork stew, and stewed venison, my father-in-law Liu Guocai asked in disbelief if today was a special holiday. Cece gently handed him utensils, and he froze as he noticed the seagull wristwatch on her wrist. Yanyan quickly explained that I had bought it for Cece, while I awkwardly scratched my head, feeling guilty about my past actions. Seeing me, my father-in-law gave me a cold, furious look. Realizing the tension could explode, Cece sent me to town to buy extra groceries and liquor for dinner, giving her time to talk to her father alone. Once I rode away on my bicycle, my father-in-law pressed Cece to tell the truth about Hu Qiuli's letter. Realizing her parents already knew everything, Cece finally broke down and confessed. She admitted that after 6 months of marriage, I had fallen into gambling, beating her when drunk, and even attempting to sell Yanyan to cover my debts. Outraged, my father-in-law stood up to find me, swearing to protect his daughters and demand a divorce so Cece could return to the city. Cece quickly reassured him that she had no intention of divorcing me. She explained that I had completely turned my life around and was treating them wonderfully now. She pointed out the new clothes, our bicycle, the watch, and our upcoming plans to build a new house. Yanyan excitedly chimed in, proving that we ate meat at every meal and showing off her huge pile of snacks. To completely put her father at ease, Yanyan revealed that I had stopped gambling entirely and handed over several thousand yuan in family savings for Cece to manage. Hearing that a rural hunter had accumulated thousands in savings and given full financial control to Cece, my father-in-law and cousin Shenglong sat frozen in absolute shock. My father-in-law, Liu Guocai, was completely incredulous when Yanyan claimed we had thousands of yuan in savings. To convince him, Cece led him into the bedroom and unlocked her cabinet to show him our credit union passbook, which clearly displayed a cash deposit of 5,000 yuan. Staring at the balance, Liu Guocai was stunned into silence. Cece gently explained how I had risked my life hunting in the freezing mountains to earn that money, begging her father to give me a chance now that I had truly turned over a new leaf. Though relieved by our newfound financial security and high standard of living, Liu Guocai remained privately worried that I might relapse into my old gambling habits. Meanwhile, I pedaled furiously toward the town's supply and marketing cooperative, completing a 20-minute ride in just 10 minutes. Wanting to entertain my father-in-law and brother-in-law with the highest honors, I sought out director Wu Junhua to buy high-end liquor. When I asked for Mao Tai, Wu Junhua explained that the town store didn't carry it, as it required special supply liquor coupons and cost 10 yuan a bottle. However, Wu Junhua offered a solution. He had 3 bottles of Maotai at home from company welfare distribution. Since his bicycle had broken down and he needed cash to buy a new one, he offered to sell me 2 bottles at the local black market rate of 35 yuan each. Overjoyed, I paid him 70 yuan for the 2 bottles. I then bought fresh fish, tofu, side dishes, and several pounds of beef from the cooperative before rushing home. By the time I returned home after 3 in the afternoon, Cici and Yanyan were chatting comfortably with my father-in-law and cousin Shenglong. Although Liu Guocai still gave me a cold, stern look the moment I walked in, Cici quickly diffused the tension by sending me into the kitchen to prepare dinner. I set the 2 prized bottles of Maotai on the table and headed to the kitchen to cook a lavish meal of dongpo pork, stir-fried beef with pickled cabbage, braised beef, and fish stew. Staring at the 2 bottles of Maotai liquor on the table, my father-in-law, Liu Guocai, was taken aback. At 10 yuan a bottle, he suspected it was a cheap knockoff bought without official vouchers. Once dinner was served, my father-in-law still gave me a cold shoulder, sternly declaring that I didn't deserve to call him dad. I kept quiet, acknowledging his justified anger, while Cici quickly smoothed things over and urged me to pour the drinks. As the rich aroma filled the room, my father-in-law's eyes lit up. Taking a sip, he confirmed it was genuine high-end Maotai, while cousin Shenglong marveled at its smooth taste. During the meal, my father-in-law tried to give the best chicken legs to his daughters. However, Yanyan insisted he eat them instead, pointing out that she and Cici ate meat every day, whereas he rarely enjoyed such luxuries back home. Surprised and slightly embarrassed, he accepted the gesture, his heart warmed by their filial devotion. Curious about how I acquired the rare liquor, my father-in-law asked if the town's supply and marketing cooperative stocked it. I explained that I bought it directly from Director Wu, at the black market rate of 35 yuan per bottle. Both my father-in-law and cousin gasped at the price, realizing 2 bottles cost more than a full month of Shenglong's salary. Seizing the moment, I raised my glass to toast my father-in-law and cousin, helping ease the tension as the alcohol flowed. Seeing her father's mood improve, Cici suggested I buy a few more bottles for him to take back home. Though my father-in-law tried to maintain a tough front, warning me that a few drinks wouldn't erase my past mistakes, he stopped objecting when I addressed him as Dad. I humbly accepted his stern warning, promising to break my own legs if I ever mistreated Cici again, and raised my glass to offer a sincere apology to him and my mother-in-law. After Cici spoke up for me, my father-in-law Liu Guocai sighed and softened his stance, agreeing to put past grudges aside for the moment. The meal lasted late into the night, after which my father-in-law and cousin stayed in one side room while I slept in the other. Cici came to my room to check on me, asking if I resented her father. I patted her head, genuinely reassuring her that I deserved every bit of his anger after how I treated her in the past. Cici smiled, promising that her father would accept me once he saw how happy we were. The next morning, my father-in-law woke up, feeling a bit embarrassed that he had let me off the hooks so easily after a few drinks. However, his mood brightened when he smelled the delicious breakfast aroma. I had woken up before dawn to buy fresh ingredients in town, serving them piping hot bowls of mutton offal soup and braised pork intestine noodles. Cici urged her father to stay a few days, but he explained that he and Shenglong had to return to the capital tomorrow. I quickly promised to bring the family to visit them in the city soon. Before leaving, my father-in-law asked where Hu Qiuli lived, mentioning that her parents had asked him to deliver a message to her. After breakfast, Cici and I accompanied him to neighboring Mo family village. When Hu Qiuli stepped out of her mud brick house holding her child, my father-in-law was frozen in shock. Staring at her sallow complexion, sunken eyes, patched-up clothes, and worn-out shoes, she looked frozen, malnourished, and miserable. Comparing Hu Qiuli's pitiful appearance to my wife, who stood clean, glowing with health in her new coat and wearing a wristwatch, my father-in-law suddenly felt dazed. He realized that Hu Qiuli was the one living a miserable life, whereas my wife was living better than most city dwellers. Looking at my glowing wife, my father-in-law secretly acknowledged that I was remarkably capable. and took wonderful care of his daughter. When my father-in-law, Liu Guozai, met Hu Qiuli outside her house, her domineering mother-in-law eyed us suspiciously. Hu Qiuli quickly pulled my father-in-law aside to talk privately, eager to hide any news about educated youth returning to the city from her husband's family. My father-in-law delivered her parents' message that they were doing everything possible to help her return to the city, while discreetly handing her 20 yuan. After Cici declined an invitation to stay, we left Mo family village. The moment we walked away, Hu Qiuli's mother-in-law cornered her and forcibly searched her pockets. Finding the 20 yuan, the old woman maliciously confiscated it, claiming it was a long-overdue dowry for taking her in. Hu Qiuli burst into helpless tears, devastated by her miserable life and furious that Cici had not fallen out with me as she had hoped. That afternoon, I bought one more bottle of Maotai from Director Wu for 35 yuan to entertain my father-in-law before his departure. The next morning, I hired a tractor in town to take my father-in-law and cousin Shenglong to the county station. Before they left, I pressed the bottle of Maotai into my father-in-law's hands, along with 2 cash red envelopes containing 100 yuan for him and 50 yuan for Shenglong. Although he tried to refuse, I insisted and ran off. On the road, my father-in-law opened his envelope and was stunned by the generous gesture, while Shenglong noted my genuine goodwill. I returned home that afternoon and reassured Cici that her father and cousin were safely on their way back to the capital. Mentioning the travel money I gave them, Cici smiled warmly, deeply touched by how thoughtfully I handled her family. 2 days later, my father-in-law arrived back home in the capital. My mother-in-law, Huang Qifen, anxiously asked if he had beaten me to protect their daughters. To her complete shock, my father-in-law revealed that our daughters were thriving, eating meat at every meal, wearing new watches, riding bicycles, and holding 5,000 yuan in bank savings. In contrast, he explained that Hu Qiuli was the one living in bitter poverty. Surprised by the sudden turn of events, my mother-in-law still felt a lingering pang of anger over my past mistakes, while my father-in-law showed her the Maotai and money I had sent back as proof of my sincere transformation. Back in the capital, my father-in-law, Liu Guozai, gradually calmed my mother-in-law's anger by explaining that I had genuinely reformed. He assured her that our daughters approved of me, showing off the 100 yuan and Maotai liquor I sent back, along with the 5,000 yuan in our credit union passbook. Reluctantly accepting the situation for now, my mother-in-law's curiosity shifted as my father-in-law began gossiping about Hu Qiuli's miserable living conditions. Meanwhile, back at Song Family Village, the plot next to our mud brick house had been leveled. Building materials were piled high, and foundation digging was underway. With construction set to officially begin next week, I enjoyed 3 large bowls of gravy noodles for breakfast and told Cici I was heading into the mountains to hunt. I gently reminded her not to overwork herself in the fields, grabbed my bow, hunting knife, 6 meat buns, and little Yahello, and set off. I met up with Uncle Fugi and Yukai, viewing this hunt as another chance to pick up money in the mountains toward my goal of becoming a 10,000 yuan household. On the trail, Yukai excitedly hoped for another massive haul, but Uncle Fugui pointed out that our last wild boar hunt succeeded only because little Yahello trapped them in a narrow canyon. I agreed, noting that the startled animal herds usually scatter fast, limiting what 3 hunters can shoot in open terrain. Brainstorming ways to solve this problem, I realized I needed a ground team to complement little Yahello's aerial scouting. I asked Uncle Fugi if he knew any local dog trainers or sellers who handled large hunting dogs. I reasoned that if trained dogs could herd animals into favorable ambush spots, my heavy bow could easily harvest full herds, regardless of terrain. Uncle Fugui suggested asking Grandpa Song about local trainers, but warned me when I brought up raising Tibetan Mastiffs. He noted that an adult Tibetan Mastiff eats 3 to 4 pounds of meat daily, a cost no ordinary hunter could sustain. I smiled to myself, knowing that while others couldn't afford such ferocious animals, my hunting success meant I could easily afford to feed a pack of Tibetan Mastiffs to dominate the forest. As Uncle Fugui, Yukai, and I trekked deeper into the mountains, Uncle Fugui suggested setting wild boar snares and animal traps at the mouth of the narrow canyon where we had previously slaughtered the boar herd. He noted that now that the snow had melted, small water pools and weeds at the bottom of the canyon would naturally draw game into the bottleneck. Agreeing that it was a prime location for traps, we headed straight toward the canyon with 5 snares and 5 traps. However, as we crossed a small hill a few hundred meters away, we spotted 5 men already setting up traps at the canyon entrance. Looking closely, I recognized the leader, Mo Wegwo, the uncle of Song Dahu and Song Erhu. Mo Wegwo harbored deep resentment toward me over his nephew's mysterious leg injuries and had deducible information about our secret hunting spot because so many villagers helped carry our boars back last time. Seeing us approach, Mo Wegwo gripped his gun, harboring malicious thoughts. His nephew warned him that since we saw them laying traps, any future catch might get stolen. Stepping forward with his men, Mo Wegwo aggressively raised his gun and threatened us, warning us not to come closer, set traps nearby, or touch anything they caught, claiming the canyon was taken on a first-come, first-served basis. Uncle Fugi's temper flared immediately. Raising his rifle, he snapped back that we discovered the canyon first and could lay traps wherever we pleased. Yukai raised his gun as well, while I drew an arrow on my heavy bow, pointing it directly at them. I scoffed at Mo Wegwo's threats, pointing out that he could easily frame us for missing game, even if his traps caught nothing. Standing our ground, I told him his intimidation tactics were useless and that we weren't pushovers. Staring down our raised weapons, Mo Wegwo flushed red, realizing that despite his 2-man advantage, an actual gunfight would mean casualties on both sides. I decided not to waste any more time arguing with Mo Wegwo and his men, so Uncle Fugui, Yukai, and I turned around and walked away. As we traveled deeper into the forest, Uncle Fugui cursed Mo Wegwo for his long-standing reputation as a bully, while I noted that malicious people like him and his leg-broken nephews always get their comeuppance eventually. Half an hour later, Little Yellow chirped high above us, signaling that he had spotted a group of sables. Knowing how fast and valuable they were, worth 300 to 400 yuan per pelt, I dashed ahead, leaving Uncle Fugui and Yukai behind. About 400 to 500 meters away, I spotted 5 sables foraging in a grassy clearing. Carefully creeping within 200 meters, I pulled 2 iron-backed arrows from my quiver, drew my heavy bow, and fired. The fast-moving arrows instantly pinned 2 sables to the ground. As the remaining 3 scrambled up nearby trees, I quickly knocked 2 more arrows and fired again, pinning 2 more sables directly to a tree trunk. Though the 5th sable managed to slip behind a trunk and escape, harvesting 4 valuable sables in seconds was a massive win. When Uncle Fugui and Yukai caught up, they marveled at the haul, which was worth at least 1,000 yuan. Suddenly, multiple gunshots echoed from a nearby hilltop. I sent Little Yellow to investigate, and he quickly reported back that Mo Wegwo's group was in serious trouble, engaged with bears. I told Uncle Fugui and Yukai to approach with caution, while I sprinted ahead to check on the situation. Over on the other hill, panic had broken out. Mo Wegwo and his 4 men were fleeing for their lives, frantically firing blind shots over their shoulders. 3 massive bears, each weighing 300 to 400 pounds, were chasing them down. The largest bear, enraged and bleeding from a gunshot wound, was rapidly closing the distance and was now only a dozen meters behind them. Reaching the top of the mountain, I looked down to see 3 massive bears pursuing Mo Wegwo and his 4 companions. The hunters had accidentally stumbled upon a bear den after setting their canyon traps. Panicking at close range, one of Mo Wegwo's nephews opened fire, enraging the bears into a relentless pursuit. Mo Wegwo and 2 of his nephews fled toward a dead end that terminated in a 10-meter-high cliff. Cornered with the enraged, 400-pound wounded bear charging at them, Mo Wegwo desperately fired a shot into its shoulder, but it failed to stop the beast. Seeing no other way to survive a brutal mauling, Mo Wegwo made a split-second decision and leaped off the 10-meter drop. His 2 nephews followed suit. Though landing on their feet saved their lives, all 3 suffered broken legs from the hard impact at the bottom. The bear hesitated at the cliff edge, roaring down at the injured men before turning back to find a path down to finish them off. Watching from the slope above, I realized this was a golden opportunity to harvest a massive fortune. Bear fur, paws, and bile command incredible market prices. With an iron-backed arrow nocked in my heavy oxhorn bow, I crept down to within 100 meters. Being upwind, the scent gave my position away, and the enraged bear immediately turned to charge up the slope at me. I released my first shot aimed at its head, but the bear shifted mid-stride, causing the arrow to strike its shoulder instead. Deeply embedded, the heavy iron tip badly crippled its front leg, making the beast howl in agony. As the furious bear limped toward me, closing the distance to 60 meters, I remained completely calm. I nocked a second iron-backed arrow, drew back with full strength, and let it fly. The arrow struck the charging bear dead center in the head. Without even a final roar, the giant beast collapsed onto the ground. After ensuring the 400-pound male bear was completely dead, I kept little Yahello circling in the sky to stay alert for the other two bears. Uncle Fugi and Yukai rushed down the slope and stood frozen in absolute awe at the sight of the massive beast I had brought down with just 2 arrows. Soon, cries for help echoed from the bottom of the nearby cliff. Mo Weiguo and his nephews were shouting for help, explaining that all 3 of them had broken their legs from the jump. Uncle Fugi chuckled that it served them right, and we ignored their pleas, focused entirely on hauling my trophy home. Meanwhile, Mo Weiguo's other 2 companions managed to survive by crawling into a narrow cave where the chasing bears couldn't reach them. By 3 in the afternoon, we arrived back at Song Family Village carrying the huge bear, causing an immediate sensation. Villagers gathered in shock, noting that no one in the village had successfully hunted a bear in over 20 years. Grandpa Song rushed out to admire the kill, and Yukai proudly told everyone, "I took it down with my bow." Knowing the weather was warming up and bear paws and bear bile needed to be sold fresh, I asked Uncle Fugui to borrow a tractor from the neighboring village so we could haul it to town immediately. When I got home to prepare, Cece looked at me with deep worry, begging me never to fight such dangerous beasts again. I comforted her, promising I only shot when it was safe and reminding her to trust my archery skills. We loaded the bear onto the tractor and set off for town. Along the way, roadside pedestrians and farmers stared in utter disbelief at the massive bear parading past them. By 5 o'clock, our grand arrival in town drew massive crowds and created a huge stir that would surely be the talk of the entire region by tomorrow. I jumped off the tractor at the Supply and Marketing Cooperative and called for Director Wu Junhua, ready to turn this incredible hunt into another massive fortune.